Welcome, welcome. You're here at Bald Voldemort. Today we present to you, what if Harry was the son of Hecate and became the true god of magic at Hogwarts? Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Remembered Fire. The summer before everything changed smelled like cut grass and Petunia Dursley's anxiety. Harry Potter was 11 years old and he had stopped pretending to be normal approximately 3 weeks ago. Not loudly. Not dramatically. He hadn't walked into the kitchen and announced anything. He'd simply stopped apologizing for things, stopped flinching when Dudley raised a hand, stopped shrinking himself down to fit the cupboard under the stairs, both literally and in every other sense that mattered. Something had shifted in him around his birthday, quiet as a tide change, and the Dursleys had felt it without being able to name it. Vernon kept shooting him looks across the dinner table, suspicious, assessing, the way a man looks at a dog that used to cower and suddenly doesn't. The cupboard still had his name on the door in Vernon's cramped handwriting. Harry had stopped sleeping in it 2 weeks ago. He slept in Dudley's second bedroom now in the actual bed, and when Vernon had appeared in the doorway red-faced and furious at 7 in the morning, Harry had simply looked at him, just looked. And the words had died somewhere in Vernon's throat and he'd retreated downstairs and nobody had said a word about it since. That was new. The power wasn't new exactly. Harry had always had something, the hair that grew back overnight, the teacher who'd somehow ended up on the school roof, the glass that vanished in the reptile house. But those had been accidents, uncontrolled, embarrassing. What was happening now felt less like an accident and more like waking up. Like he'd been walking around with his eyes half closed his whole life and something was slowly, patiently prying them open. Plants leaned toward him when he walked through the garden. Not obviously, not the way a sunflower tracks the sun, just a subtle inclination, a reaching. He'd noticed it first with the rosebush by the back fence, 3 thorny branches curving gently inward as he passed, like an old friend reaching out a hand. He'd stopped and stared at it for a long moment and the rosebush had bloomed, all at once, every bud cracking open in a cascade of deep red that smelled like copper and summer. Petunia had seen it from the kitchen window. She'd made a sound he'd never heard from her before, not anger, not contempt, something older, something almost like grief. Broken things fixed themselves in his vicinity. He'd knocked Dudley's model of a racing car off the shelf accidentally, genuinely accidentally, and watched it shatter on the floor and then watched it slowly, piece by piece, reassemble itself, the tiny plastic wheels rolling back to their axles, the chassis clicking shut like it had only been resting. He'd stood very still and let it happen and felt the quiet satisfaction of it deep in his chest, like a song resolving to its final note. The shadows were the strangest part. They didn't behave. Not in the wrong, frightening way, they weren't reaching for him or forming shapes, they simply seemed aware of him. In a room with a single lamp, his shadow would be the darkest thing in it, rich and deep and somehow deliberate, like it was paying attention. At night, walking to the bathroom, the dark around him had a texture to it, a presence, and he'd gotten used to greeting it the way you greet a familiar neighborhood cat, acknowledgement without expectation. He didn't tell anyone, there was no one to tell. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry was in the garden, sitting cross-legged in the grass with a beetle on his knee. He'd been watching it for 20 minutes, this small emerald green thing methodically cleaning its antennae, and there was something deeply satisfying about the watching, the way it went about its business completely indifferent to the vast world around it. He'd been thinking about that, indifference. He was deeply, deeply tired of performing smallness for people who decided he was small. The owl dropped the letter in his lap and was gone before he could blink. Harry looked down at the thick cream envelope. His name was on it in vivid emerald ink, and the address was startlingly specific. The Garden, 4 Privet Drive, as if whoever sent it had been watching. The wax seal on the back was a coat of arms, elaborate and old, and when he pressed his thumb to it, the wax cracked with a sound like a struck match. He read it once, then again, then he sat in the garden for a while longer with the beetle, who had moved to the back of his hand and seemed unbothered by the entire situation. Inside the house, Vernon Dursley began to shout. Harry folded the letter carefully into his pocket and stood up. The conversation that followed was the shortest version of what should have been a much longer fight. Vernon went red, then purple, then a color Harry didn't have a name for. Petunia stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded so tightly she might have been holding herself together. Dudley sat on the stairs with his mouth open, forgotten. "You're not going," Vernon said for what might have been the 4th time. His fist came down on the kitchen table. "You are not." "I am though," Harry said, simple, not defiant, not angry. Just factual, the way you'd say the sky is blue or water is wet. He watched Vernon's face cycle through several emotions and settle on something he hadn't expected: fear. Not the anger fear that had driven 10 years of cupboards and hand-me-downs. Something quieter, something almost sincere. "Boy," Vernon said, and his voice had dropped half an octave, "you don't know what you're getting into." Harry studied him for a long moment. You knew about all of it the whole time. Vernon didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Harry nodded once. Right, he said. I'll need money for supplies. He got it. The night before Diagon Alley, he dreamed for the first time, not the shapeless falling dreams he'd had his whole childhood. This was different, structured, deliberate, lit by a moon that was 3 times too large and silver-white as bone. He was standing at a crossroads, 4 dirt paths meeting in the dark, and the grass on either side was frost-touched and still. Torches burned at each corner, black iron brackets holding flames that were not orange or yellow but a deep, cold, luminous green. She was already there when he turned around. He didn't know how he knew it was her. He just did, the way you know your own heartbeat, not by thinking about it, but because it's been with you so long it's become part of the background of existing. She was tall, taller than made immediate sense, dressed in something dark that moved like smoke, and her face was, he would never be able to fully remember her face afterward, which he thought was probably intentional. There were dogs at her feet, 3 of them black and huge and quiet. The torches burned in her eyes. You got the letter, she said. Her voice was every nighttime sound at once, wind through leaves, water over stones, the distant echo of something calling across a dark field. Yeah, Harry said. He was not afraid. That was the part that surprised him later, turning it over in his memory. He was not afraid at all. Are you the one who sent it? Dumbledore sent it. Something moved across her face that might have been amusement. I merely made sure you received it before your uncle could burn it. Harry looked at the torches. Green fire. Something clicked slow and certain in the back of his mind. Who are you? She was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. Around them the crossroads breathed. I have many names, she said. You may use the one that matters. She paused. Mother. The green torches flared. Harry stood very still. The word landed in him like a stone dropped in deep water, the impact on the surface, and then the long, slow ripple going down and down and down into dark he hadn't known was there. You left me with them, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement offered for examination, because Harry had learned very young to examine things rather than react to them. I hid you, she said. There is a difference, though I understand if it feels like one. She moved, not walked, exactly, more like the space between them decided to be smaller and crouched down to be level with him, and he could feel the cold that came off her, clean and sharp as winter air, not unpleasant. You were not ready. The world was not ready. The magic that lives in you is not. It is not a thing that can be taught in a classroom, Harry. It is very old and it does not negotiate. If it had woken completely when you were small, before you understood even the edges of yourself, it would have been bad, Harry said. It would have been catastrophic. Her voice was flat and matter-of-fact and somehow worse for it. I watched you for 10 years every single day. He thought about the shadows, the way they'd always felt like company. That was you, he said, sometimes. She reached out and touched his scar, one fingertip impossibly gentle. He felt it like a string being plucked. This is not his mark, whatever they'll tell you. He tried to kill you and the magic in you refused, and what you carry here is the memory of that refusal. It is a scar shaped like lightning because that is what it felt like, a strike and a survival. What am I? Harry asked. Not who, he knew who. He was asking the larger question, the one that had been gathering at the base of his skull for 3 weeks like a storm that hadn't broken yet. She looked at him for a long moment with those torchfire eyes. You are the son of the goddess of magic, she said. And you are going to a school built on the bones of everything I created. Pay attention, learn their rules. A pause. And then remember that their rules are not yours. He woke up with green fire in his vision and the absolute unshakable certainty that everything was about to become very interesting. Diagon Alley was like being inside a symphony. Not in any way he could have explained to someone else. It wasn't loud, exactly. It wasn't overwhelming in the conventional sense. It was that every single thing in that long cobblestone street was alive with magic, and Harry's awareness of magic had been rapidly becoming less like a vague sense and more like a second set of eyes. He walked through the leaky cauldron behind Hagrid, enormous, warm, volcanic Hagrid who'd shown up on the doorstep like a small avalanche, and told Harry he was a wizard with the proud confidence of a man delivering the best news in history. And every face turned toward him, and Harry didn't think it was all about the scar. It was like he thought about the rosebush, the way it had leaned. Magic here was doing something similar, a subtle universal orientation, the way iron filings align near a magnet. He walked through it and tried not to look at anyone's face too directly and focused on Hagrid's broad back moving ahead of him. Gringotts was marble and vast and cold in the satisfying way of deep caves, and the goblins looked at him with their bright ancient eyes and he looked back. And there was a mutual moment of recognition that he filed away without comment. His vault, which still felt strange, a door opening on a whole life he hadn't known he was owed, was full of gold and something that was not gold in the very back of the chamber. A box, small and dark, with 3 keys. He picked it up without thinking and Hagrid made a startled sound. "Best leave that, Harry, might not be." "It's mine," Harry said, not rudely, just with the same quiet certainty he'd used on Vernon, and the box opened in his hands. Inside were 3 iron keys on a ring and a folded note in green ink that said, simply, "For when you need doors open that should stay closed." He pocketed the keys. Hagrid decided not to push it. The rest of Diagon Alley passed in a cascade of sensation. The texture of new robes, the smell of potions' ingredients, the particular dusty warmth of Flourish and Blots where the books shuffled on their shelves when he walked past, not violently, just a reorganizing, as if presenting their best faces. He bought everything on the list and a few things that weren't on it because they asked to be bought. A small obsidian mirror no bigger than his palm, marked down to nearly nothing, which hummed against his fingers like a sleeping cat, and then Hagrid led him to a narrow shop at the end of the street. Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. The door opened before he touched it. The shop was dim and smelled of cedar and something underneath that, something older, mineral, almost electric. Wand boxes lined every wall from floor to ceiling, and Harry stood in the center of the space and felt them the way you feel a crowd before you see it. Not threatening, waiting. Ollivander materialized from somewhere near the back, old, pale, silver-eyed, moving with the slightly deliberate quality of someone who has spent centuries cultivating the impression of harmlessness. He stopped when he saw Harry. His silver eyes dropped to the scar, rose again, and then did something unexpected. They went past the scar to Harry's face and stayed there, studying him with an expression Harry couldn't immediately categorize. Ollivander said. He had a voice like old paper. "Yes, I had a feeling." "About what?" Harry asked. Ollivander ignored the question, which Harry suspected was habitual. He began moving through the shop in that floating, purposeful way of his, pulling boxes, sliding them back, murmuring to himself. "Holly and phoenix feather, perhaps your father's was." He paused, tilted his head. "Number another box." "Or ebony dragon heartstring." He stopped again, this time turning to look at Harry with something that had moved from academic interest to something sharper. "What," Ollivander said very carefully, "is your dominant hand?" "Both," Harry said honestly. Ollivander stared at him. "Both," Harry repeated. Ollivander set down the box he was holding and looked at Harry for a long, still moment. Then he turned to the very back of the shop and reached up to a shelf Harry hadn't noticed, half hidden behind a cascade of dust and older boxes, and brought down something that looked different from the others, not a wand box but a long, thin case of dark wood closed with a catch that looked like a crescent moon. He set it on the counter. He didn't open it. "I made this," Ollivander said, 43 years ago. I don't know why I made it. I woke up one morning knowing the materials and knowing the measurements, and I made it, and I put it away because nothing in my experience told me there was a witch or wizard alive who should hold it." He paused. "The core is something I have never used before or since. I called it an apology when I logged it in the register because I didn't know what else to call it." "What is it?" Hagrid rumbled from the doorway. Ollivander looked at Harry instead of answering. "The wood is blackthorn, associated with the night with dark magic, though that's a misnomer. It's simply old magic, the kind that precedes the categorization of dark and light entirely. The length is 13.5 inches, which I've never made before or since, and the core is..." He paused again. "I collected it at a crossroads at midnight. I believed at the time it was a fragment of something shed by whatever passed through that crossroads. I believe I was right." Silence. "Open it," Harry said. Ollivander opened the case. The wand inside was dark, almost black, with a grain to it like the surface of still water, and it was the least dramatic-looking object in the shop. Harry reached out and picked it up and felt everything. Not a surge, not an explosion. Something far quieter and far more total than that. Like stepping outside on the first truly cold morning of autumn and breathing in and feeling the air reach every corner of your lungs. Like the moment before you fall asleep when your whole body finally lets go. The wand was warm in his hand, warmer than wood should be, and the shop around him exhaled. Every wand box on every shelf glowed, all at once faint and gold, and then was still. Ollivander had gone very white. He was gripping the edge of the counter with both hands and staring at Harry with those silver eyes wide and something in them that Harry recognized after a moment, the same look Vernon had given him in the kitchen. Not anger, not wonder. Awe edged with the particular terror of something that has spent its life studying a subject and just discovered the subject is infinitely larger than the study. "I see," Ollivander whispered. "I see now why I made it." Harry lowered the wand. He felt absolutely steady, which was the strangest part. He'd half expected to feel overwhelmed or frightened, but he just felt right. The way you feel right when you come home after a very long time away. How much? He asked. Ollivander waved a hand. Consider it a professional obligation. He paused. Mr. Potter, I have been in this business for a very long time. I remember every wand I have ever sold and every witch and wizard I have ever sold to. I want you to understand that I mean this quite sincerely. He stopped, started again. Please be careful with that. I will, Harry said. He tucked the wand into his jacket pocket, and it sat there without any weight at all, which shouldn't have been physically possible and was. Hagrid, who had been very quiet through all of this, put a massive hand briefly on Harry's shoulder as they stepped back out into Diagon Alley. The sun was going down and the street was going gold, and the magic around Harry hummed its quiet, familiar hum. Rig then, Hagrid said with the slightly strained cheerfulness of a man who has decided to process things later. Ice cream. Yeah, Harry said and smiled for the first time that day. Yeah, ice cream sounds great. They ate it on a bench outside Florian Fortescue's, and Harry let himself simply be a boy with an ice cream while the alley bustled around him. And Hagrid told him stories about Hogwarts, the moving staircases, the ghosts, the forbidden forest, which Hagrid described with the deeply suspicious enthusiasm of someone who spends a great deal of time somewhere they insist students shouldn't go. Harry ate his pistachio and listened and felt the 3 iron keys in his pocket and the wand that weighed nothing and the echo of a voice like nighttime at a crossroads. Their rules are not yours. Hagrid, he said between bites. Did you know my mother? The woman who raised me, Lily Potter. Hagrid went a little soft at that. Oh, brilliant witch, your mum, one the best, kind, too proper kind, not juice polite, the sort kind that actually costs something, you know. He wiped at his eye with the back of his enormous hand. She loved ye something fierce. Harry nodded. He looked at his ice cream. He thought about Hecate at the crossroads and the grief that had moved across her face when she said, I watched you every day, and he thought there was room in him to love both of those things, the fierce mortal love and the vast divine one, without needing to choose between them. She sounds wonderful, he said, and meant it. The stars came out early over Diagon Alley, earlier than they should have, and burned bright and green-tinged at their centers, and Harry watched them while he finished the last of his ice cream and did not remark on it, and the night gathered around him like something that recognized its own. The last week at Privet Drive was a formality. Harry packed his trunk, the beautiful battered school trunk that was now absolutely crammed with efficiency and something close to joy. He went through Dudley's cast-off room and gathered his few actual possessions, which were genuinely few, and felt surprisingly little of what he'd expected to feel. He'd braced himself for grief, maybe, or bitterness. The long ledger of small cruelties, the cupboard, the hand-me-downs, the birthdays that went unmarked, 10 years of strategic invisibility. He'd thought confronting the leaving of this place might force him to confront all of that, but the feelings were simpler than he'd expected. Not erased, not healed, but filed, placed. He knew what this house had been, and he knew what it hadn't been, and he was leaving it, and that was enough. He did one strange thing before he left. He went to the garden at dawn, the morning of September 1st, and he stood in the early gray light and pressed one hand flat against the earth. Not dramatically, just because he wanted to. He felt the life in the soil, genuinely felt it, layers of it, worms and roots and sleeping seeds and the vast unhurried chemical patience of things growing, and he let a thread of himself go down into it, and the whole garden exhaled, and every plant in it put out one new leaf, tender and pale and exact. Petunia was standing in the kitchen doorway when he straightened up. She'd been there for a while, he knew without looking. He turned and looked at her instead. She was in her dressing gown, arms crossed, face doing that thing it did when she was working very hard to suppress something. Her eyes were red at the rims, and he'd never seen that before. Your mother, she started. Lily, Harry said gently. Lily, Petunia's jaw worked. She loved you. I want you to know whatever else you've decided about me, and I imagine you've decided quite a lot, she loved you. I saw her with you before she would have, she stopped, swallowed. She would have been very proud. Harry stood with the morning air around him and looked at this woman who had feared him and diminished him, and in her own warped and furious way had kept him alive, kept him hidden, done the one thing Hecate asked of a mortal and done it badly and done it anyway, and felt something complicated and complete. I know, he said. He picked up his trunk. Goodbye, Aunt Petunia. She didn't say goodbye back. But she watched him all the way to the taxi, and she was still standing in the doorway when it pulled away, and he thought, in an oddly generous corner of his heart, that this was probably the best she could do, and that it would have to be enough. King's Cross was chaos in the best possible way. He found platform 9 3/4 through something that was not quite the instructions Hagrid had written down. He walked toward the barrier between 9 and 10, and the barrier knew him. Or more precisely, the magic woven into it recognized what was in him and opened without needing to be run at, like a door held open by a courteous stranger. He walked through into the steam and noise of the scarlet train and the platform crowded with families and breathed it all in. A boy with red hair and a face full of freckles crashed into him from the left and apologized with the practiced speed of someone who crashes into people frequently. Sorry, wasn't watching, he stopped, blinked at Harry's scar with the visible effort of someone trying not to look at a scar. You're Harry Potter. Yeah, Harry said. You're Ron Weasley. He stuck out a hand and Harry shook it, and Ron grinned, broad and unguarded, the grin of someone who wasn't going to make a complicated thing out of this. Brilliant. I've got 5 brothers and not a single one of them ever ran into Harry Potter at the station. He paused thoughtfully. Well, Fred might have, but he'd have robbed you. Harry laughed, a real one, unexpected, and found he liked the sound of it. I think I'd have noticed. They got on the train together with the easy comfort of people who have decided wordlessly and immediately that they're going to get along. The compartment filled with steam, and then with the smell of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and Ron's cheerful commentary on each one. That's dirt, definitely dirt. Oh, that's actually a meat pie, that's brilliant. And Harry sat across from him with the wand in his pocket and the keys against his hip and the dream still threaded through his memory and thought, here we go then. Outside, the Scottish landscape opened up wild and green and enormous, and the train carried him toward the thing he'd been moving toward his whole life without knowing it. And the shadows in the compartment were soft and attentive, and the flames in the corridor sconces burned, just for a moment, green. Ron didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't say anything. Harry decided he was going to like Ron Weasley very much indeed. Chapter 2. The sorting of something ancient. The boats were Hermione Granger's idea of a problem. Not the boats themselves, she'd read about the boats, had in fact read about almost everything, and had spent the crossing from the train to the castle's edge in a state of barely contained excitement that she was expressing as rapid-fire information delivery to anyone within earshot. The problem was the boy sitting 2 boats ahead of her, the one with the dark hair and the calm eyes who hadn't said a word since they'd pushed off from the shore and who the lake seemed to be behaving differently around. She'd noticed at first when his boat's wake didn't match the others. The water around it was smoother, slightly luminescent, the way deep water sometimes looks when something large is moving underneath, except nothing was moving underneath, she was fairly certain because she'd been watching. Then one of the giant squid's tentacles had surfaced briefly near Neville Longbottom's boat and caused the expected commotion. And in the scramble, Harry Potter had simply looked at the water and the tentacle had gone back down, not retreated in fear, gone back down like something that had been gently reminded of its manners. Hermione filed this under anomalous and kept watching. The castle revealed itself around the cliff's edge the way magic should reveal things, suddenly, completely, without apology. Every first year went breathless at the same moment, that collective inhale, and even Hermione forgot her notes for a handful of seconds because it was enormous and alive in the way that buildings built by magic over centuries become alive, layered with intention and memory and the residue of 1,000 years of extraordinary human beings doing extraordinary things inside them. Harry Potter looked at it with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not awe exactly. More like recognition. She filed that too. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall with the energy of a woman who had done this 40-odd times and found it no less demanding for the repetition. She was tall and sharp-cornered and wore her authority the way good cloaks are worn, naturally, without adjustment, as if it had been made to fit. She explained the sorting with the compressed efficiency of someone who has the same speech word perfect and is internally timing it, then left them in the antechamber with the ghosts and the nerves and the smell of the feast coming through the walls. Harry stood slightly apart from the cluster of first years without seeming to mean to. It wasn't aloofness, he'd spent the last hour on the train being genuinely warm with Ron, had helped Neville find his toad twice, had listened to Hermione's entire summary of Hogwarts, a history with what appeared to be actual interest. It was more that the space around him organized itself differently. The other students had the jittery, pack-animal closeness of shared anxiety, pressing together for comfort. Harry just stood, and the air around him was steady, and Hermione thought of a stone in the middle of a stream. I've read about the sorting, she announced to no one in particular, because sometimes information needed to exist in the air regardless of audience. The hat was made by the 4 founders, Godric Gryffindors originally. It's been sentient for over 1,000 years. It reads your mind during the sorting. Does it hurt? Neville asked, in the voice of someone hoping the answer is no while expecting the answer is yes. It's not supposed to, she paused. The records aren't entirely clear. Brilliant, said Ron, eating his 3rd chocolate frog in what seemed like genuine defiance of anxiety. Harry turned and looked at her. Direct eye contact, which she'd already noticed he did without self-consciousness, not staring, just genuinely looking like he was interested in what he found. What else does it do, the hat, besides read minds? It talks to you, Hermione said. Inside your head, it's looking for where you belong, your dominant traits, your values, she paused because she'd started to say potential and then thought about the word more carefully. It looks for what you are. Harry considered this. What if what you are doesn't fit the categories? Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. McGonagall came back before she could answer, and the question hung in the antechamber air like smoke. The Great Hall was another kind of overwhelming. 4 long tables, the golden light of thousands of candles floating midair, the enchanted ceiling showing a thick scatter of stars through the illusion of open sky. 400 students turning to look at the new first years filing in, and the particular quality of 400 people assessing you that was somehow more evaluating than any individual gaze. Hermione walked in the line and watched Harry walk 3 places ahead of her and watched the hall react. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the Hollywood version of someone special entering a room with gasps and pointing. It was more like frequency. Like the whole hall had been running at a certain pitch and something slightly different walked in and every vibrating string adjusted almost involuntarily to accommodate it. The candles directly overhead didn't flare, but they burned a degree brighter. The ceiling stars sharpened. The sorting hat sitting on its stool at the front of the hall moved, just slightly. An almost imperceptible lane, a tipping forward the way a dog orients toward an interesting smell. Hermione watched it happen and felt the particular electric discomfort of something she couldn't explain. McGonagall unrolled her scroll. "When I call your name," she said, with the crisp authority of someone who genuinely does not have time for disorder, "you will come forward, sit on the stool, and put on the hat." The sorting proceeded alphabetically, which was standard, and Hermione tracked the hat's behavior methodically while she waited. Hannah Abbott, 30 seconds, Hufflepuff. Terry Boot, a minute, Ravenclaw. Susan Bones, 45 seconds. The hat varied, but the pattern was consistent: brief deliberation, a declaration, movement to the appropriate table. She was sorted fourth. The hat settled over her ears. She felt the peculiar sensation of something sifting through her thoughts with the brisk efficiency of a very fast librarian. And before she'd finished being uncomfortable with the intrusion, it said, in a dry voice that managed to be simultaneously fond and exasperated, "Oh, Gryffindor, obviously, you didn't need me for this," and announced her house to polite applause and the particularly enthusiastic welcome of the Gryffindor table's Percy Weasley, who looked like he had opinions about new students and the proper way to have them. She sat and watched. Neville Longbottom went up looking like he might actually faint and came back a Gryffindor with the hat having barely touched his head, which seemed to surprise Neville more than anyone. Ron Weasley was sorted Gryffindor in about 30 seconds, which he reported afterward to have involved the hat saying another one in a tone of philosophical resignation. Then McGonagall said, "Potter, Harry," and the hall did the thing Hermione had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. The sound. Not loud, actually the opposite of loud, a sudden concentrated silence that was different from the silence before. The way a held breath is different from just not speaking. Every face at every table turned. Whispers bloomed and died like a wave that came up and receded. The Slytherin table had a pointed-faced blonde boy who leaned forward with open calculation, and the Gryffindor table erupted in a surge of craning necks. And the teacher's table had every face turned except one, Snape at the far end, who was already watching Harry with the particular focused stillness of someone who had been watching him for a while. Harry walked up the aisle. He didn't look at any of them. Not in the uncomfortable way of someone desperately avoiding attention, but in the specific way of someone who has simply decided that the audience is not the point. He sat on the stool and picked up the hat and put it on his head himself before McGonagall could reach for it, and it settled over his ears and nothing. A second passed. 2, 5. Hermione watched the hat and watched Harry and watched the teacher's table where Dumbledore at the center had steepled his fingers and was watching the hat with the specific quality of attention that was not the proud enjoyment of a new school year. 10 seconds. 15. The hall's silence thickened from anticipatory to something else. The sorting hat was shaking. Not vibrating, not trembling with effort in the normal way, actually shaking, a fine tremor working through the ancient fabric, the kind of tremor that happens when something is encountering something too large for its usual frameworks. Hermione felt her breath catch. Across the table, Ron had gone very still. 20 seconds, 30. Inside the hat's consciousness, which was a strange and layered place, 1,000 years of accumulated impression and judgment and the memory of every mind it had ever touched, something unprecedented was happening. The hat had sorted 17,412 witches and wizards. It knew the architecture of magical minds the way a cartographer knows coastlines. The particular confident sprawl of a Gryffindor's courage, the deep organized structure of Ravenclaw intellect, the warm compacted loyalty of Hufflepuff, the cold precise ambition of Slytherin. It had seen variations. It had sorted people who didn't fit neatly, who carried 2 or 3 house qualities in genuine balance, and it had always found an answer, always found the dominant thread. It reached into Harry Potter's mind and found, oh, not darkness, Not power in the way it usually registered power, the sharp-edged ambitious kind, or the blazing heroic kind. This was something anterior to those categories. This was the thing the categories had been made from. Trying to sort it into a house was like trying to sort the ocean into a glass. The hat tried anyway. It found courage, vast, unhurried courage, the kind that didn't need witnesses. It found intellect, deep, lateral, intuitive. It found loyalty that ran so fundamentally through every other trait that it was less a characteristic and more a structural element, the way load-bearing walls are part of a building. It found not ambition exactly, but a quality that was ambition's larger ancestor, the will to be rather than to achieve. It found, underneath all of it, magic, not magic as an ability or a trait or a gift. Magic as an essence. The way you'd find water in someone who was, at their deepest level, water. The hat had been made from magic, and it knew magic the way you know your own skin, and what it was touching now was something it had never touched before, and it understood in a single vertiginous instant that it was not sorting this boy. It was being examined by him. "Can you feel that?" Harry said inside its consciousness, with a kind of interested curiosity that was somehow more disconcerting than any confrontation could have been. "That thing underneath everything, what do you call that?" The hat composed itself. It had handled extraordinary students before. It could handle this. "I call it magic," it said carefully. "But I suspect you already know that." "I'm starting to," Harry said, "so where do I go?" The hat considered. "You know, in 1,000 years, I've never had a student ask me that question without meaning which house. You're asking something different." "I'm asking where I go," Harry said again, simply, "not where I fit." The hat was quiet for 3 full seconds of subjective time, which was nearly geological by its own standards. It turned the question over. It thought about what it knew and what it didn't, about houses and purposes, and what it had actually been built to do, which was not to limit but to begin. "Gryffindor," it said finally. And then in a much quieter register, so quiet it barely registered. "But child, do pay attention to the crossroads." "Gryffindor," the table erupted. Ron was on his feet. The Weasley twins somewhere behind him produced a noise that might have been a firework of some kind. Percy was clapping with the disciplined enthusiasm of a prefect who has opinions about how enthusiasm should be expressed. The hall's tension broke all at once into the released noise of 400 people who had been holding their breath. Harry took the hat off and set it on the stool and turned to walk to the Gryffindor table. He passed McGonagall, who had gone very still, and he glanced at her, and she looked back, and something passed between them that Hermione couldn't decode from where she was sitting, a look of mutual assessment, careful and respectful on both sides. Then he sat down across from Hermione and 2 seats from Ron, and Ron immediately shoved the plate of chicken in his direction, and Harry laughed, and it was over. Or it was beginning. Hermione wasn't sure there was a difference yet. "That was the longest sorting I've ever seen," she said. Harry put a piece of chicken on his plate. "Was it?" The hat was shaking. What did it say to you?" He looked at her, that direct, unguarded look. She had the brief vertiginous sensation of looking at something through water, the surface clear, the depths genuinely unclear, and not in the way of secrets being kept, more in the way of depths being genuinely deep. "That it was glad I was here," Harry said. Which was clearly not everything, and equally clearly everything he was going to say. And Hermione, who prided herself on always needing to know more, who had developed persistent comprehensive curiosity into something close to a personal philosophy, found herself accepting this, which was unusual enough to be worth noting. She noted it and ate her chicken and watched the teacher's table. Dumbledore was looking at Harry with an expression that reminded her of something she couldn't place until later, in the half-dark of the dormitory with the sounds of 4 other girls breathing around her, when she finally identified it. It was the expression in portraits she'd seen of naturalists, scientists, explorers, the specific face of someone who has found the thing they've been looking for and is already simultaneously thinking about how to study it. She didn't sleep well. The dormitory in Gryffindor Tower was red and gold, and warm, and Hermione could see the stars through the window. She lay on her back and organized what she knew, which was what she always did when the world was confusing. Facts: Harry Potter was 11 years old. He was the son of James and Lily Potter, deceased. He had survived the killing curse as an infant. He was famous, which he seemed to find both boring and mildly inconvenient. He had been sorted Gryffindor after a sorting that lasted 47 seconds by her count, longer than any sorting she'd read about in any record she could find. The hat had shaken. The water in the lake had gone smooth around his boat. The squid had retreated when he looked at it. The wand Mr. Ollivander had given him, she'd noticed it on the train. He'd taken it out absently and set it on the seat next to him, and she'd felt the air in the compartment do something. Not like electricity, more like pressure. Like the air in a room gets different when something very old enters it. Candles burned brighter near him. She'd catalogued 4 separate instances during the feast. She turned all of this over and thought about her books and thought about magical theory and thought about the question he'd asked in the antechamber. What if what you are doesn't fit the categories? She didn't have an answer for it yet. She decided she would find one. This was perhaps less about academic curiosity and more about the particular discomfort of a person who has built her identity on understanding things encountering something she didn't understand, but she preferred not to examine that distinction too closely at 11 o'clock on the first night of school. She closed her eyes. She slept. She dreamed about crossroads, she didn't know why. Harry was still awake. Not because he couldn't sleep, he was tired, pleasantly, the good tired of a day that had been genuinely full. The four-poster bed was softer than anything he'd ever slept in, which was admittedly not a high bar, and the sound of the tower was good. Wind against old stone, the settling sounds of a very old building, Ron's steady breathing from across the room, Neville's slightly anxious murmur of something that resolved, after a moment, into the names of plants. He lay on his back with his hands behind his head and looked at the canopy of the bed and listened to the castle. Because it was doing something, Hogwarts. He'd been feeling it since the boats, this subtle, ongoing thing, and now in the quiet of deep night with the feast and the noise and the performance of the day stripped away, he could feel it clearly. The castle was aware of him. Not in a haunted house hostile way, more the way a large old dog is aware of a specific person in the house, tracking without staring, present without intrusive. The stones knew him, or more precisely the magic in the stones knew what was in him, and he searched for the right word and found it, delighted. It was a strange feeling, being delighted in by a building. He'd tried to talk to the hat, which had been a fascinating experience and also slightly alarming. The hat had been afraid of him, underneath its professional composure. Not afraid like it wanted to flee, afraid the way you're afraid of something that is very large and very close and not remotely malicious and still slightly overwhelming. He'd felt bad about that. He'd tried to make it smaller, the thing he was, tried to tuck it back so the hat could think clearly, and the hat had given him the impression of a deep breath and then sorted him in about the same time it would have taken to sort anyone else. Gryffindor. He rolled the word around. He didn't feel like any particular house. He didn't feel like the opposite of any particular house, either. He felt like himself, which he suspected was what the hat had been getting at in its careful, ancient way. He belonged in Gryffindor not because of what he was in the abstract, but because of what he valued in practice, and what he valued was action over passivity, honesty over comfort, the courage to be present in the world rather than retreating from it. The hat's parting words hung in the dark. Do pay attention to the crossroads. He thought about his mother, about the green torches and the three dogs and the voice like all the sounds of night at once. He reached into the darkness behind his eyes where his sense of her lived, vague, warm, attending, and felt her acknowledgement. Like a hand briefly squeezed in the dark. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. He closed his eyes. From somewhere deep in the castle, too deep to be an architectural sound, originating from somewhere below foundations, in the bedrock itself, there was a long, low resonance. Not a sound exactly, more like the castle exhaling. More like something sleeping in the stone of this place, rolling over and getting comfortable. The way ancient things do when they recognize the presence of something they've been waiting for. Harry felt it in his chest like a second heartbeat. He slept. McGonagall knocked on Dumbledore's door at 11:40 and didn't wait to be called in, which was unusual enough that Dumbledore looked up from his desk with genuine interest. Minerva, the Potter boy. She closed the door behind her and stood in the center of the study with the specific compressed quality of a woman sitting on a great deal of emotion out of long practice. The sorting. 47 seconds, Dumbledore said mildly. I counted. I've been teaching here for 31 years. McGonagall's voice was flat and controlled, and underneath the control was something that was not quite fear. I have supervised every sorting since 1969. I have never seen the hat shake. No, Dumbledore agreed. What was it reacting to? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He turned the half-moon glasses in his hands, that familiar gesture, and the firelight caught them and threw pale arcs across the ceiling. His expression was the specific expression of a man who has been thinking about a thing for a very long time and has reached conclusions he is not yet ready to share. Magic, he said simply. The hat encountered a great deal of magic. McGonagall stared at him. That is the least useful answer you have ever given me, and I have known you for 4 decades. Something moved across Dumbledore's face that might in a different man have been amusement. I'm not trying to be unhelpful, Minerva, I'm telling you what I know. He set the glasses down. I knew when the Potters were killed that the boy had survived something that should not have been survivable. I assumed at the time that this was Lily's sacrifice and Voldemort's miscalculation. I still believe those things. A pause. I am increasingly uncertain that they are the whole story. What's the rest of it? I don't know yet. He picked up his glasses again, but I intend to find out. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. She had known Albus Dumbledore long enough to hear what he didn't say, and what he wasn't saying had the particular texture of a man who has a hypothesis and is choosing not to voice it because voicing it would make it real. "He looked at me," she said, "when he walked past on his way to the table." "Did he?" "He looked at me the way adults look at each other. A beat. Not cold, not calculating, just level honest." She paused. "I found it more unsettling than if he'd been cold." Dumbledore said nothing. The fire crackled. Fawkes, on his perch in the corner, opened one eye and looked at the door, as if aware of something in the direction of Gryffindor Tower. "Keep an eye on him," Dumbledore said. "Gently, Minerva, he is first and foremost a child." McGonagall nodded. She went to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. "When the hat sorted him," she said without turning around. "Did you feel the castle at the moment it announced?" Silence. "Yes," Dumbledore said softly. "I felt it." She left without another word. Dumbledore sat alone in his firelit study and turned his glasses over and over in his hands and thought, carefully and at length, about the nature of magic, and the nature of gods, and the nature of boys who were perhaps both. The next morning arrived bright and clear and absurdly Scottish, all grey-blue sky and cold, clean air and the smell of the lake coming up through the tower window. Harry was up before Ron, which he suspected was going to be a permanent state of affairs, and dressed quickly and went down to the common room alone. It was early enough that it was empty. The fire was burning low in the great, deep red coals. He stood in front of it and looked around the room, the squashy armchairs, the red-end gold hangings, the notice board already acquiring a layer of notices despite being the second day of September, the fat round windows showing the sky starting to go gold, and felt a specific warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He belonged here. Not because Gryffindor was the best or the right or the only good house. He didn't believe any of that, but because he was here, and he had a gift for making wherever he was feel like it was where he was supposed to be. He'd learned that in the Dursleys' garden, pressing his palm to the earth in the early morning. You carry your home in how you inhabit space. Hermione came down 12 minutes later, which surprised him. He'd had her pegged as a 7:30 person. She was already dressed and carrying 3 books, which did not surprise him at all. She stopped when she saw him. She had the focused expression of someone who had been waiting to say something. "You asked what happens if you don't fit the categories," she said. "Good morning," Harry said. She blinked. "Good morning, you asked last night, I remember." "I thought about it." She came and sat in the armchair across from the fire, books in her lap. "The answer technically is that it hasn't come up. In the documented history of Hogwarts, every student who has been sorted into one of the 4 houses. Every documented magical ability has fit within the established frameworks of wandwork, potion-making, creature studies, astronomy, and the auxiliary branches." She paused. "But the frameworks themselves aren't, they're not universal. They're specific to British magical tradition. Greek magical tradition is completely different. Egyptian magical tradition is different again. It's all the same thing at the root, but though." She stopped. "Why are you smiling? You stayed up late thinking about this," Harry said. A pause. "Yes, obviously it's interesting." "I know," he wasn't teasing her, he meant it. "You're right that it's interesting, and you're right that the frameworks aren't universal." He looked at the fire. "The frameworks are maps. Maps are useful, but a map is not the territory." Hermione stared at him. "That's a quote, Alfred Korzybski." "Is it? I read it in a book once, didn't know who said it." He looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," she said with the immediate certainty of someone who has never in her life declined information. "Why does it matter to you what I am?" He wasn't challenging her, genuine curiosity. "You've known me for less than a day." Hermione considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Because I understand almost everything I encounter," she said. "Not immediately, but eventually I can find the explanation, the rule, the framework it fits. And you?" She looked at him direct and honest in a way that reminded him of himself. "You don't fit, and that's either because I don't have enough information yet or because the frameworks are wrong and I need to know which one it is." Harry nodded. "Fair enough," he said. "Let's find out together." From above, the sound of Ron falling out of bed. They looked at the ceiling simultaneously, and Harry felt the morning settle around them, the quiet before the school year properly began, the last moment of before, and then Ron's footsteps descended and the fire crackled and it was time to start. The first class of the day was Transfiguration, and it started 20 minutes in with something that should not have been possible. McGonagall had turned her desk into a pig and back, a demonstration of such casual mastery that half the class had gasped, and Harry had watched with genuine appreciation, because there was something beautiful about someone who has done something 10,000 times and still does it with that kind of exactness. Then she'd set them the task of turning a matchstick into a needle, standard first-year work, and walked the room while they tried. Most of them weren't getting it. Hermione got it by the 3rd try, which Harry noted with satisfaction on her behalf. Ron was working with the specific frustrated concentration of someone who understands the theory and is being betrayed by execution. Harry looked at his matchstick. He picked up his wand and then set it down again almost immediately because the wand felt beside the point. He looked at the matchstick. He didn't incant anything. He didn't gesture. He looked at the matchstick and reached, the same way he'd reached into the garden soil on the morning he left Privet Drive, the same way he'd looked at the squid and thought very simply, needle. The matchstick became a needle. Not in the gradual shimmer and shift way of student transfiguration, completely instantly with no visible transition. One moment matchstick, next moment needle, silver and perfect and catching the light. The silence started with McGonagall, who was 3 students away and stopped mid-step. Then it spread. Harry looked up from the needle. McGonagall was looking at him with an expression that was trying very hard to be pedagogically neutral and not entirely succeeding. Around him, the students who'd noticed Hermione immediately, Ron, half a second later, the girl to his left had gone very still. "Mr. Potter," McGonagall said, "Professor, your wand." Harry looked at the wand on the desk beside him. "I didn't need it." "That's..." McGonagall stopped. She came to his desk and looked at the needle, which was a perfect needle, and then looked at Harry, and in the look was the same thing he'd seen last night, the careful, respectful assessment. She was recalibrating. He could see it happening in real time, the rapid internal revision of a rigorous mind encountering data that doesn't fit the current model. "Pick up your wand," she said, "and do it again." He did, same result. Without the wand, same result. McGonagall stood very still for a moment. Then she said briskly, 5 points to Gryffindor, and moved on to help a boy in the back row whose matchstick appeared to have turned into something that was neither matchstick nor needle but a deeply uncomfortable hybrid. And she didn't look at Harry again for the rest of class. But he could feel her awareness of him in the room like a compass finding north. Hermione leaned sideways and whispered, "You didn't use a spell." "No," Harry said quietly, "you didn't use the wand." "I know." Harry, a pause, "That's not how transfiguration works." He looked at her. "I know," he said again, and he wasn't being dismissive, wasn't being smug, he was just stating a simple fact with a simple implication, and she read the implication clearly, and her eyes went wide, and she turned back to her matchstick and stared at it for a long time. Then she said very quietly to her matchstick rather than to him, "Right, okay, right." He thought she'd probably be in the library before dinner. He was right. Chapter 3, What Magic Remembers. The library at Hogwarts was not organized the way Hermione would have organized it. She decided this by the 3rd day, having spent a combined total of 6 hours in it since term started, long enough to develop strong opinions about the cataloging system, which appeared to have been devised by someone with a poetic rather than practical relationship to alphabetical order. Books on magical theory were shelved near books on magical creatures if the creatures were theoretical enough. Books on ancient runes sat between herbology references, and a section labeled, without further explanation, adjacencies. The restricted section, cordoned off at the back with a velvet rope and a faint shimmer of warding, was clearly organized on an entirely separate and more sensible system. She could see the spines from here, neat and deliberate, and it irritated her profoundly that she couldn't access it. She was currently on her 4th book about wandless magic, which was teaching her a great deal about why wandless magic wasn't possible and essentially nothing about why Harry kept doing it. The chair across from her scraped back. She looked up expecting Ron, who had started appearing in the library with the resigned loyalty of someone who has decided not to fight his social destiny, and found Harry instead, setting down a small stack of books and dropping into the chair with the easy comfort of someone who has been in libraries before. "Find anything?" he asked. "Nothing useful." She pushed the open book toward him, finger marking the relevant passage. Wandless magic is theoretically possible in extremely advanced practitioners, masters or above, but it requires years of practice and complete wand familiarity first. The idea being that you have to understand the instrument before you can transcend it. She paused. "You've had your wand for 3 days. Harry glanced at the passage. "What if you don't need the instrument to begin with? The instrument isn't about need, it's about focus. The wand focuses magical intent into a form that can interface with external reality. Without it, magic is supposed to be," she checked the book, "diffuse, uncontrolled." "Mine isn't." "No," Hermione agreed. "It isn't." She studied him. He was wearing his school robes with the sleeves pushed up and he looked entirely ordinary except that the lamp on the table between them was burning slightly the wrong color. A warm gold that was 2 shades deeper than every other lamp in the library, and had been doing so since he sat down. She doubted he knew. "I have a theory." "I know you do." He sounded genuinely pleased about this. "The accepted model of magic treats it as a force like electricity or gravity. External, universal, accessed by witches and wizards through talent and training and tools. The wand is a conduit, the body is a circuit, the spell is the instruction. She paused. But there are older texts, much older, pre-wand, pre-unified British magical tradition that describe magic differently, not as a force to be accessed but as a substance, something that exists in things and people in varying concentrations. And in a very small number of documented historical cases, something that is not just concentrated in a person but is constitutive of them. Harry waited. She appreciated that he waited, that he didn't fill the silence. Constitutive means it's not something they have, she said carefully. It's something they are. And if that's what's happening, if you're not a person who has magic but a person who is magic, then the wand model doesn't apply. You're not accessing the force, you are the force. The wand is a circle when you're a center. She stopped and looked at him. Does that feel right? He thought about it, actually thought about it, which she appreciated rather than immediately agreeing. It feels partial, he said finally, like you've described the shape of it from the outside. I can feel the edges you're describing, but there's something underneath that the model doesn't reach. What's underneath it? The lamp between them pulsed once, gold deepening to amber. Outside the library windows, the sky had gone the dark blue of late Scottish evening, and the torches in the corridor threw flickering orange through the glass. I don't know yet, Harry said, but I'm looking. He tapped the stack of books he'd brought. Hermione leaned forward and read the spines. 3 of them she recognized, history of magic texts, 1 on pre-Roman magical traditions, 1 on Greek theurgy she hadn't known the library had. The 4th made her blink. It was thin, very old, the leather so dark it was almost black, with no title on the spine. She reached for it and felt a faint resistance, like a mild static charge, and withdrew her hand. Where did you find this? She asked. The restricted section. She stared at him. The restricted section requires a signed note from a teacher. I know. He opened the black book with the ease of someone opening their own journal. It opened for me. It what? The rope was up. I walked past it to get to the Greek theurgy book and the books on the other side of the rope. A few of them turned on the shelf like they were presenting their spines to face me. He paused. And then one of them moved to the edge of the shelf and I took it. I don't know what else to call that besides the book choosing to come with me. Hermione's mouth was open. She closed it. Harry, those books are restricted for a reason. The magic in some of them is, I know. He met her eyes. But they're not restricted from me, Hermione. I don't mean because I think the rules don't apply to me. I mean the restriction literally doesn't work. The warding isn't engaging. He paused. Do you want to know what's in it? She absolutely wanted to know what was in it. She was also deeply uncomfortable with this, which she thought spoke well of her principles and less well of her curiosity, which was louder. She looked at the black book. What is it? It's not in English, Harry said. Most of it. But some sections. He turned to a page near the back, careful with the brittle paper. The text was in several languages, some she recognized, some she didn't, and in the margins, in handwriting that looked different from the main text, were notes in a script she'd never seen. I can read about a third of it. Hermione looked at the page. That's ancient Greek, that section, and I think that's Mycenaean Linear B. She felt a cold thrill run down her spine. Harry, this text is pre-classical. This is, where did this come from? She reached for it again and the static charge was stronger this time. A distinct refusal, and she withdrew. Harry turned the book toward him and read. She who stands at the threshold of all workings, whose name is spoken first in every rite, whose torch lights the pathways between what is known and what cannot be named, the magic of her children is not learned, it is remembered. He stopped. Hermione was completely still. Remembered, she said, that's the word. He traced the line with one finger, not touching it, just above it. Not acquired, not trained, remembered. Like it was already there, and learning magic is just recollection. Whose children? Hermione asked, though some part of her already knew she was going to be disturbed by the answer. Harry looked up at her. His eyes in the lamplight were deep and steady. I think I need to tell you something, he said. He told her about the dream, about the crossroads and the green torches and the voice that was every nighttime sound at once. About the dogs and the silver moon too large for the sky. He told it plainly without dramatizing it, and she listened without interrupting, which cost her something because she had a lot of questions building up in real time. When he finished, she said nothing for a moment, turning it over. Hecate, she said finally, yes. Greek goddess of, she stopped, because saying it out loud was different from thinking it, and saying it out loud about the boy sitting across from her was different again. Magic, crossroads, the night, she paused. And you believe her? I don't not believe her, Harry said, but I don't just believe things because they're told to me, even especially by someone claiming to be my mother. What I believe is what I feel. He gestured vaguely at the lamp, at the room, at himself. This, what the hat felt. What happened in Transfiguration, the books moving on the shelf, I believe my experience. The explanation fits my experience. The explanation is that you're the son of a goddess, Hermione said. Yes. I need a minute. Take 2. She took 3. She organized the information systematically because that was how her mind worked under pressure. Lay it out, find the framework, map the implications. Hecate was a primordial deity in Greek tradition, pre-Olympian, associated with magic, crossroads, the night, transitions, thresholds. She was not peripheral, she was foundational, one of the few pre-Olympian figures maintained in full honor after the transition of divine power. In magical traditions predating the Wand era, she was frequently referenced as the source rather than a patron. The text on the page, "The magic of her children is not learned," it is remembered, implied that her children were not unusual in the way of powerful witches or wizards, but constitutively different in the way Harry had described. The lamplight, the squid, the hat shaking, the matchstick into a needle in one instant without a wand or a word, 47 seconds and the hat afraid. "Okay," Hermione said. Harry raised an eyebrow. "I mean, I have 1,000 questions and I'm going to need to find significantly better research materials than what this library has, and I suspect most of what I need is in the restricted section or doesn't exist in this country." But she steadied herself. "Okay. I believe you, the evidence is empirically consistent." A pause. "Also, you're very calm about this." "I've had a few weeks," Harry said. "It comes in waves, mostly He looked for the word. "Interested, is that strange?" "No," Hermione said and meant it. "It's you." He smiled at that and the lamp went warm gold again, and from the restricted section there was a soft sound like several books settling comfortably back on a shelf, as if satisfied with how the conversation had gone. Potions was a different kind of revelation. Snape arrived at it sideways, which Harry had been expecting. He'd felt the man's attention in the Great Hall on the first night. Not hostile, not warm, something more complex and harder to categorize, with old grief moving underneath it like weather under cloud. He decided to wait and see what Snape would do with whatever he was carrying, and potions was apparently where he decided to do it. The classroom was in the dungeons, cool and stone-smelling, with shelves of preserved specimens in jars casting green and amber light over the work tables. The students filed in with the general atmosphere of people who have been warned about this class, and Snape swept in with the specific quality of a man who has made his entrance the first part of his lesson, the dark robes, the absolute silence that followed him, the way he stood at the front and let the quiet settle before saying a single word. Harry had to hand it to him. It was very well done. "There will be no foolish wand-waving in this class," Snape said, and his voice was exactly what Harry had expected from the face, controlled, precise, with a coldness that was less cruelty and more armor. "Many of you will not understand the beauty of the potions you will brew here. That is acceptable. Understanding is not a requirement for following instruction." He paused, letting his gaze move across the room. "But excellence is expected, carelessness will not be tolerated, stupidity will not be forgiven." His gaze landed on Harry. "Ah yes, Harry Potter." Harry looked back, not defiantly, not nervously, just looked. "Our new celebrity." A pause that was precisely timed for maximum effect. "Tell me, Mr. Potter. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood?" "Draught of living death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. Asphodel is in the lily family, which makes it symbolically significant in potion making. Lily family ingredients tend to amplify the emotional resonance of sleep-related potions rather than just the chemical effect." A beat of silence. Snape had not moved, but something in his face had shifted very slightly. "Where the stone is placed," Harry blinked. "Bezoar, a stone found in a goat's stomach, works as a general antidote to most poisons. You'd want it from a Persian bezoar goat specifically for the strongest effect, the mineral concentration in their diet, and the difference," Snape said, overriding the rest, "between monkshood and wolfsbane. There isn't one, same plant, aconitum. The name changes depending on the tradition. Wolfsbane is the folk name, monkshood is the botanical." Harry paused. "Also called aconite, devil's helmet, and in older potion-making texts, the touch of Hecate." The room went quiet in a different way. Snape's eyes hadn't moved from Harry's face. There was something in them that Harry couldn't read. The old grief was nearer the surface now, stirred by something, and something else running alongside it that was sharp and calculating and not simple to name. 5 points to Gryffindor," Snape said. His voice was absolutely neutral. "For knowing your materials before entering my classroom. Do not mistake this for leniency, Mr. Potter. In this room you are a student. Whatever else you may be is irrelevant." Harry nodded. "Understood, Professor." The whatever else hung in the air between them, pointed and deliberate, and Harry thought Snape was not a stupid man and not a man who chose words carelessly. The question was what he was going to do with what he'd noticed, and Harry didn't yet have enough information to predict the answer. He filed it away and brewed his potion, and it was perfect. Not through magic, through reading. He'd read the potion's textbook twice on the train and remembered everything. And following exact instructions with complete attention produced exact results. Neville's cauldron melted halfway through. Harry leaned over without comment and redirected the heat source before it could fully collapse, one hand on the base of the cauldron, and Neville looked at him with a startlement that was close to tears. How did you? Your wrist was off. You were stirring on an ellipse instead of a circle. Harry demonstrated. Try it this way. Neville tried it. The potion stabilized. Neville's face cycled through relief, gratitude, and something that was the early beginning of confidence, and Harry thought about what Hecate had said, "You are going to a school built on the bones of everything I created," and thought that maybe the most important thing he could do with what he was wasn't spectacular or divine at all. Sometimes it was redirecting a wrist. Snape saw it. Snape saw everything in that classroom, with the complete vigilant attention of someone for whom every detail was data, and he didn't comment, and he gave Neville's corrected potion a grade that was almost fair, which in the context of Snape's pedagogy was essentially high praise. After class, when the corridor was loud with students and the relief of fresh air, Hermione fell into step beside Harry and said quietly, "The touch of Hecate. Noticed that, you didn't have to say it." "No," Harry agreed, "but I wasn't going to pretend I didn't know it." He looked at her sideways. "He already knows something is different. Pretending otherwise would just be insulting both of us." Hermione was quiet for a step or two. "And Snape, do you trust him?" Harry thought about the old grief moving under the surface of that controlled face. The precision of his attention. The way he'd said whatever else you may be is irrelevant, like a man reminding himself of something he needed to believe. "I think he's someone who made a very bad choice a long time ago and has spent every day since trying to work it into something worth having paid for it," Harry said. "Whether that makes him trustworthy depends entirely on which direction his regret is pointed." Hermione stared at him. "Harry, you've had one potions class with him." "I know," he shrugged. "People aren't that complicated if you're willing to look directly at them." She filed this under things Harry says that she needs more time to process and added it to a list that was, 4 days into term, already quite long. Quirrell's classes had a smell. Not incense, not the chalk and dust of most classrooms. Something underneath those things, a mineral sharpness that Harry caught at the edge of every inhale, like hot stone or ozone before a storm. He'd noticed it on the first day and placed it without being able to name it. The same quality as the Dursleys' garden in the early morning when something was growing too fast. The same quality as the back of the reptile house at the zoo. Old and cold and alive in a specific way. Quirrell himself was small and skittish, his stutter seemingly genuine in its inconsistency. It came and went in a pattern that didn't track with the obvious nervous moments but showed up instead in the middle of confidence, which was strange. Harry watched him the way he'd watched the beetle in the garden. Patient, non-judgmental, interested. There was something living in the stutter's gaps, something that was not Quirrell. He felt it most clearly when Quirrell's eyes went to him. There would be a moment, half a second less, when the eyes would change. The uncertain, mild, academic eyes of a defense professor in over his head would go flat and dark and very still. And in that stillness was something Harry recognized the way you recognize weather patterns. Pressure, temperature, the particular quality of air that precedes something large and moving. And then it would be gone, and Quirrell would stutter through a summary of jinxes, and no one else seemed to notice. On the third class, Harry stayed after. Quirrell was erasing the board, or trying to. The enchanted chalk apparently had opinions about the erasing charm he was using, and startled when Harry appeared at his shoulder. Mr. Potter, what are you carrying?" Harry asked. Quirrell went completely still. The chalk fell. In the stillness, the smell was stronger, that hot stone sharpness, and underneath it something darker, almost sweet like overripe fruit. The quality of Quirrell's eyes changed, that half-second flicker, but this time it held for longer, and the thing behind his eyes looked at Harry with unguarded attention for a full 3 seconds before Quirrell recovered. "I beg your, I don't know what you don't have to tell me," Harry said. He wasn't threatening, wasn't confrontational. He kept his voice completely level. "I'm not going to do anything about it right now. I just wanted you to know that I know." He picked up the chalk from the floor and set it on the desk and left. In the corridor, he stopped and stood still for a moment and let the feeling settle, because there had been a feeling in those 3 seconds when the thing behind Quirrell's eyes had looked at him directly. Not fear, not anger. He'd been looked at with recognition and with a hunger that was old and very large, and with something underneath those things that surprised him. Envy. Whatever was riding in Quirrell's skull had looked at Harry and wanted what Harry was. Not to take it, not exactly or not yet, but wanted it with the specific ache of something that had spent a long time trying to approximate a thing and was now looking at the real article. He filed it. He told Ron and Hermione that evening in the common room. Ron went slightly pale. Hermione went instantly to the books. "What do you think it is?" "I don't know precisely," Harry said. "Something old. Something that's used to being the most powerful thing in a room and isn't comfortable with the situation being otherwise." "Should we tell Dumbledore?" Ron asked. Harry thought about Dumbledore and the look on his face at the sorting, not wonder, but the careful assessing attention of a man already planning around a variable. "Not yet," he said. "Let's see what else there is to find first." Harry, Hermione started. I'm not in danger from it, Harry said with the complete calm of someone reporting a weather observation. I'm very sure of that. Ron opened his mouth, looked at Harry's face, and closed it. Hermione looked like she wanted to argue and instead said, right then, but we're paying attention. Good, Harry said, that's all I was suggesting. The restricted section opened for him fully on a Friday. He'd been past it a dozen times, had borrowed the black book and two others in the same way, approaching the rope, the books turning to present themselves, the warding simply not engaging. This time when he walked past, the rope itself fell, not dramatically. It unhooked from one side and swung down, quiet as anything, and the ward shimmer dissolved like morning fog, and the books on the other side sat waiting on their shelves. He looked at the rope on the floor for a moment. Then he walked in. The restricted section was smaller than it appeared from outside, shelves close together, the books here older and more varied than the main collection, some of them moving slightly in the way of books that have strong enough magic in them to want to show it. He walked slowly, reading spines, and let his awareness do the work rather than his eyes. The same way he'd let the matchstick know what it was meant to be. 3 books pulled him. The first was another pre-classical text, this one in better condition than the black book, bound in something that looked like vellum but felt different to the touch, smoother, more deliberate. He opened it and the first page said, in ancient Greek he could now read without knowing how, on the first tongue and its children's birthright. He caught his breath. The first tongue, he'd known the phrase without knowing he knew it, the way you know words from dreams. He read fast, standing between the shelves, and what he read rearranged things in him like furniture being moved to better positions. The first tongue was not a language exactly. It was more like the underlying grammar of magic itself. Not the words that described it, but the logic that preceded the words. Before wands, before spells, before every tradition that had given magic structure, there had been something more fundamental. Intent and substance and will meeting directly without mediation. The text called it speaking to magic in its own voice. Witches and wizards speak to magic as one speaks to a river, the text said. They redirect, contain, channel. The children of the first ones speak to magic as one speaks to oneself. There is no distance between the word and the power. There is no instrument between the intent and the effect. There is only the magic, which is them being what it is. He stood in the restricted section with the book open in his hands and felt the truth of it settle through him like warm water, and when he finally looked up he was aware that he was smiling. Right, he said softly to no one in particular, or perhaps to the magic in the shelves around him, which had gone very quiet and very present in the way of something listening to something it wanted to hear. So this is what I am. The second book was a record of cases, not formal records, more like a naturalist's journal, documenting encounters with practitioners who operated outside the wand tradition. Some were benign, some were catastrophic. The entries were detached, curious, and never quite captured what they were describing, which Harry thought was inevitable. You couldn't describe the first tongue in ordinary language any more than you could taste color. But one entry stopped him cold. It was dated in a system he didn't recognize, which made it very old, and it said, met today with a child of the threshold goddess. 8 years of age, recently come into awareness. What struck me most was not the power, which was considerable, but the child's relationship to it. Not burden, not gift, simple fact. The child said when I asked what magic felt like, it feels like being alive. I have thought about this answer for 30 years and I do not think it was metaphorical. He read it twice. A child of the threshold goddess. He didn't know what the threshold goddess referred to, but he had a feeling he knew what the threshold referred to, crossroads, the place between places, the moment between moments. He felt it in the scar on his forehead, that faint, warm resonance he'd carried since he could remember, not the scar itself, but what lived in it. The memory of a refusal. The moment between dying and not dying, which was the longest crossroads of all. It feels like being alive. Yes, he thought. That's exactly it. The third book he didn't open. He picked it up and knew from the feel of it, something in the binding, the weight, the particular cold and warm quality that wasn't quite temperature, that it wasn't yet time. He put it back on the shelf and promised it, without quite knowing he was doing so, that he'd come back. He walked out of the restricted section with the first tongue book under his arm, and the rope rose and rehooked itself behind him, and the ward shimmer reasserted, and Madame Pince looked up from her desk across the library with the expression of someone who has sensed a disturbance and cannot locate its source. He smiled at her. She looked slightly unnerved by this. He went to find his friends. The common room that night was loud with the ongoing drama of house points and homework, and the Weasley twins' latest scheme involving what sounded like a charm on the staircases. Harry sat in front of the fire with Ron on his left and Hermione on his right, and the first tongue book in his lap, open to the page he'd been thinking about. Neville had joined them an hour ago with a herbology essay he was stuck on, and Harry had helped him through it with the same straightforward patience he'd used on the potion. And Neville had gone from anxious to engaged to almost animated in the span of 40 minutes. His round face, bright with the specific happiness of someone who has understood something they'd stopped expecting to understand. "You know," Ron said, watching Neville sketch a diagram of Devil's Snare with the confidence of a person who finally gets it, "you're really good at that." "At what?" Harry asked. "Teaching, explaining things." Ron ate a chocolate frog and thought about it. "You don't make people feel stupid, even when they're asking stupid questions." "There aren't stupid questions," Harry said automatically. "There are," Ron said cheerfully. "I've asked loads of them, you still didn't make me feel stupid." He paused. "How do you do that?" Harry looked at the fire. "I think about what I would have needed to hear at the moment thereat," he said. "Not what I know now, what I would have needed then." Ron nodded slowly, in the manner of someone filing this away for later examination. Hermione had looked up from her book and was watching Harry with the expression she got when he said something that fit an emerging theory, but she didn't say anything and the fire crackled. And outside the tower windows the Scottish sky was dark and enormous and full of stars. Later, when Ron and Neville had gone to bed and the common room had gone quiet, Hermione said, without looking up from her book, "The touch of Hecate is in 17 pre-modern potion references. 3 of them are in this library. In every reference it's described as a reagent that, and I'm quoting, clarifies the essential nature of any compound it enters." Harry looked at her. "It doesn't change what's there," she said. "It reveals what's already there." She finally looked up. "I don't think that's a coincidence." He thought about the matchstick, not changed, remembered. "No," he said, "I don't either." The fire burned green for just a second. Neither of them remarked on it. Outside, the stars were very bright, and somewhere deep in the castle, a door that had been closed for 1,000 years turned very slightly on its hinges, as if something vast and patient was beginning at last to stir. Chapter 4. The Trespass of Gods. Halloween arrived the way it always did at Hogwarts. Too much food, too many enchanted pumpkins, and the particular festive energy of a castle that had been celebrating this particular night for 1,000 years, and had opinions about how it should feel. Harry spent the morning of October 31st sitting on the bank of the lake. Not because he was avoiding the decorating frenzy inside, though the sight of Peeves attempting to weaponize 50 floating candles at 7 in the morning had been a reasonable thing to walk away from, but because the lake was interesting today. The water was doing something. Not dramatically, not with the tentacle surfacing theatrical quality of the squid making an appearance. Just a subtle alteration in the surface tension, a quality of the water that reminded him of a mirror that's been breathed on, not quite reflective, not quite opaque, something in between. He sat with his shoes off and his feet in the cold and watched it. The first tongue book was beside him on the grass, open to a passage he'd been working through for 3 days, not because it was difficult to read, he could read it as naturally as English now, which was its own separate strangeness worth examining, but because what it described required a kind of experiential understanding that couldn't be rushed, like learning to balance. The intellectual knowledge came immediately. The body knowledge took time. The passage described something the text called attending. Not a spell, not a technique. More like a quality of presence, the deliberate, complete awareness of the magic in all things, not just in yourself. The passage said, "The child of the first ones who has learned only herself is like a musician who has mastered one instrument. The child who has learned to attend has learned that everything is music." He was working on attending. The lake was interesting because it had layers. Surface magic, the enchantments Dumbledore and previous headmasters had woven into it over centuries, mostly protective, some stabilizing, one very old one he couldn't fully read yet. Deeper, the natural magic of a body of water this old and this large, which was less like a spell and more like a geological fact, the way mountains have their own quality of presence. And deeper still in the water itself and the creatures in it and the sediment of 1,000 years, something that was simply life, undirected and enormous and profoundly indifferent to any individual thing. He let his awareness rest in all 3 layers simultaneously and felt the attending settle like breathing. "You're going to catch cold," Hermione said from behind him. He hadn't heard her approach, which was unusual. She'd learned in the 6 weeks since term began to move quietly around him, not because he startled, but because she'd noticed that he was often in the middle of something that looked like nothing from the outside and was clearly something from the inside, and interrupting felt rude. He appreciated this. "Probably not," he said. She sat down beside him, close enough to share the warmth of proximity, and looked at the lake a beat. "It's doing something today." "Yes," he looked at her. "You felt it." "I noticed the surface, the light's different." She had a book in her lap because she always had a book in her lap, but she wasn't looking at it. "Is it because of," she gestured at the date. "Partly." He looked back at the water. "Samhain is an old threshold, one of the oldest. The boundary between here and not here gets thinner." He paused. Magic gets more present, more awake. If you're attending, you can feel it through everything. Is that what you're doing, attending? Trying to? She was quiet for a moment. Then, what does it feel like? He thought about it seriously because the question deserved a serious answer. Like the difference between looking at a painting and standing inside it, he said finally. Normally, I feel the magic in things as texture, presence. Today, it's more like conversation. Hermione wrote something in the margin of her book. He'd stopped being startled by this. Harry, she said, there's something I should tell you about the third-floor corridor. He turned to look at her fully. I found a reference, she said, last night, in one of the History of Magic supplementary texts, a footnote which characteristically contained more actual information than the chapter it was footnoting. She opened the book to a marked page. Hogwarts has had before, in its history, a number of occasions where extremely valuable or dangerous magical objects were stored within the castle under heavy protective enchantment. The footnote references a set of protections described as, and I'm quoting, designed to challenge a competent 7th-year wizard. That phrasing, she looked up. It's very specific, competent 7th year. Someone's deliberately housing something here, Harry said, under protections calibrated to stop most adults but not all, which means they expect someone to try for it and they expect to test whoever tries. A pause. Or they want to be sure whoever gets through is good enough to be trusted with it. Harry looked at the lake. Dumbledore, that's my conclusion. And what's at the end of it? Hermione hesitated, in the way of someone who has a theory she's not entirely comfortable with yet. The footnote mentioned a stone, she said. Just that. A stone that was briefly held at Gringotts and moved to a secondary secure location earlier this year. The footnote is from a text written about 150 years ago, which is obviously wrong, but some of the supplementary texts have ongoing annotation systems and someone has added to this in. I checked the ink date the last 12 months. Nicholas Flamel, Harry said. Hermione stared at him. How did you, the first tongue text? There's a reference to a man who attempted to approximate immortality through magical alchemy and came closer than anyone before or since. Flamel, the product was something called the Philosopher's Stone. He looked at her. Alchemy is a very old branch of magic, pre-wand tradition. In the first tongue text, it's described as an attempt to achieve through process what certain practitioners hold innately. He paused. The transmutation of base things into their essential nature. Sound familiar? Hermione's mouth opened, closed. The stone doesn't grant immortality, she said, working through it rapidly. It enables the production of something that does, the elixir of life. But the process, Flamel's process, is essentially a magical act of fundamental transformation. She looked at him, like the matchstick. Much slower, Harry said, and probably significantly less elegant, but yes, essentially. So whoever is after the stone wants to live forever, Harry said, or wants to understand how Flamel got as close as he did, or both. He looked at the lake again. The thing I felt in Quirrell, the hunger. They sat with that for a moment. Should we do something? Hermione asked. We're already doing something, Harry said. We're paying attention. She closed her book. Above them, a rook called from somewhere in the direction of the Forbidden Forest, and the castle behind them spilled cheerful golden light from every window into the gray morning, and the lake held its strange altered surface, and Harry held his attending like a cupped light. He didn't know, sitting there in the thin October sun, that in 6 hours a mountain troll would walk into the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor and change everything about how the term was going. The feast was magnificent. Harry ate with the uncomplicated appreciation of someone who had spent 10 years with deliberately minimal food, and had not yet lost the joy of a table piled high with everything. Ron sat beside him and demonstrated his personal policy of trying everything at least once, which was both admirable and slightly alarming in practice. And the hall was warm and full of the particular noise of 400 people in a genuinely good mood. Hermione wasn't there. Harry had noticed by the midpoint of the feast, catalogued it, and decided to give it 20 more minutes before he did something about it. She'd been in an argument with Ron that afternoon. He hadn't been there for all of it. Had caught the end. Ron saying something thoughtless about her being a know-it-all and Hermione's face doing the specific controlled thing it did when she was hurt and refusing to show it. And then she'd walked away quickly with her face pointed at the ground. He'd told Ron he needed to fix that, and Ron had looked uncomfortable and said he would, and then the feast had started and she wasn't at the table and Ron's face had gained the greenish quality of someone who now genuinely regrets a choice. She's probably in the library, Ron said, not eating. It's Halloween, Harry said. Even the library's closed. Ron's greenish quality deepened. Then Professor Quirrell burst through the great hall doors. He wasn't stuttering. That was the first thing Harry noticed. The stutter was completely gone, and the mild, uncertain academic quality was completely gone with it, and what was left was a man in a state of genuine fear that was too real to be anything but actual. Troll, he said, his voice cracking on it. In the dungeon, thought you should know. And then he fainted, with the convincing quality of someone who has been through something and not the quality of a performance. Around Harry, the hall erupted. Dumbledore took immediate control of it, sending students back to houses in organized groups, prefects collecting their years with the urgent efficiency of people who have been trained for exactly this. Percy Weasley's voice rose above the general noise with the particular quality of a boy who has finally arrived at the moment he's been prefect training for. Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked at Harry. Hermione, Ron said. Yes, Harry said, come on. They moved against the current of students heading for the stairs, which required a specific kind of deliberate progress. And Harry felt the castle's awareness sharpen around him as they moved, the shift in the corridor magic, the particular alertness of a building that knows something wrong is happening inside it. He ran his hand along the wall without thinking as they turned up the second-floor stairs, and the wall was cold and slightly vibrating, the magic in the stone agitated and anxious. Second-floor east corridor, he thought or felt or both. The castle gave him something that was not quite language, just direction, and he turned right instead of left and Ron followed without question. They heard the troll before they saw it. The sound was enormous. Not loud exactly in the ordinary school corridor sense, but enormous in the way of something very large moving through a space too small for it. The kind of sound that comes through the floor as much as through the air. And underneath it, a sound that was much smaller and much more important. A girl's voice, very controlled, saying Alohomora repeatedly in a tone that was trying not to be frightened and was frightened anyway. Harry pushed open the girl's bathroom door. The troll was 12 feet tall and it was not, in the immediate physical sense, all there. That was the thing that stopped him for half a second on the threshold, not the size, not the smell, which was considerable, not the small club it was dragging along the floor and had apparently used to reduce 3 of the bathroom sinks to rubble. It was that the troll had a quality he recognized from Quirrell's classroom. That mineral sharpness. The hot stone smell. Something had been in this troll recently, maybe minutes ago, guiding it and had left, and what remained was an enormous animal in a very small space that was frightened and angry and expressing both of these in the most destructive way available. Hermione was pressed against the far wall behind a fractured cubicle divider, and she had stopped saying Alohomora and was now saying nothing, which was somehow worse. Her wand was in her hand. Her eyes, when they found Harry's, were wide and clear and terrified, and also underneath the terrified, relieved in a way that made his chest do something complicated. The troll turned. It was very large. Its eyes were small and red-rimmed and stupid and frightened, which was the dangerous kind of stupid, the kind that doesn't calculate odds or pick fights it can lose, it just reacts. The club came up, dragging plaster dust, and the troll made a sound that wasn't language but communicated threat with complete clarity. Ron behind Harry did something brave and stupid simultaneously. He picked up a sink tap from the rubble on the floor and threw it at the troll's head with a shout, because he was Ron and this was apparently what Ron did when confronted with a 12-foot troll. It hit. The troll turned toward him. Harry stepped forward. He didn't raise his wand. He didn't incant anything. He looked at the troll the way he'd looked at the matchstick, not with intention to harm, because harm wasn't the point. Harm was a category error and reached. Not into the troll but past it, into the magic that had made it. Because trolls were not made of nothing, were not random accidents of large biology. There was something in their physical architecture that was magical in origin, the same way dragons were magical in origin, the same way every apex magical creature carried something in its structure that was more than just animal. He attended to it, found the thread, and pulled. What happened next was not violent. It was elegant in the specific sense of the simplest solution to a complex problem. The troll's magical cohesion, the thing that animated it as a magical creature rather than just a very large animal, unwound. Not painfully, he made sure of that. He was very deliberate about that, but completely. The troll did not collapse so much as resolve. One moment 12 feet of agitated magical creature filling a Hogwarts bathroom. Then a very brief sound like a chord on a very large instrument, deep and resonant, and then a scattering of raw magical energy across the floor tiles, golden white and momentary, and then nothing. No troll, no club, no rubble because the magic that had gone back out into the air had apparently tidied as it went. The bathroom was intact. Harry lowered his hand. He'd raised it at some point, apparently without quite meaning to. Silence. Hermione was staring at him from behind her divider with an expression he didn't have a category for yet. Ron had dropped the sink tap and was looking at the space where the troll had been with the expression of a boy, revising his entire understanding of several things simultaneously. Harry, Ron said, in a voice that was trying to be normal and achieving it about 70% of the way. What? Are you hurt? Harry said to Hermione. She looked down at herself as if checking. Number a pause. You didn't fight it. Number you it just there's nothing left. It wasn't destroyed, Harry said, because this felt important to clarify. The magic that made it what it was went back to where magic goes, the biological components. He paused. He wasn't entirely sure where the biological components had gone, actually. He filed this as something to think about later. The troll is fine in whatever sense applies. It simply isn't here anymore. Hermione stared at him for a long moment. Then she walked out from behind the divider, tucking her wand away, and came to stand in front of him and looked at him with a directness that matched his own. "Thank you," she said. "Simple and complete." "You're welcome," he said. "Simple and complete." Ron let out a very long breath. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we should probably go before the teachers find us in the girls' bathroom with a lot of nothing where a troll used to be." This was, Harry agreed, probably accurate. They had made it approximately 12 steps into the corridor before the teachers arrived. McGonagall came around the corner first, and she was magnificent in emergency, robes sharp, face sharp, every line of her communicating the specific energy of a woman who has been terrified and is expressing it as fury. Snape was a step behind her, face unreadable in the corridor torchlight. Quirrell brought up the rear, looking pale and shaky in the way of someone who has had a difficult evening and hasn't finished processing it yet. McGonagall took in the scene with the speed of a woman who has been a teacher for 30 years, 3 first years in a corridor where a troll had been reported. No troll, no damage, no blood, 3 uninjured children. "Explain," she said. Ron opened his mouth. "The troll came up to the second floor," Harry said, before Ron could construct something complicated. "We knew Hermione was here because she'd been upset at the feast and went to the bathroom instead. We came to find her. The troll had already found her." He paused. "I dealt with it." McGonagall's gaze went to the bathroom door. She pushed it open, looked inside. The intact bathroom looked back. She turned slowly to Harry. "You dealt with it," she said, in the voice of someone repeating a phrase to make sure they've understood it. "It's gone," Harry said. "No one is hurt." McGonagall stared at him. In the staring was everything she'd been noting since the first day. The matchstick, the sorting, every small accumulated observation of 6 weeks, and Harry watched it all arrive at the same destination, watched her face do the thing it did when a rigorous mind reaches a conclusion it would prefer not to reach. Behind her, Snape was looking at the space where the troll had been, not at Harry, interestingly, but at the space, with the expression of a man reading something in the absence of evidence. His eyes moved to Harry's after a moment, and the look was brief and dark and not hostile. More like a mathematician who has been handed a problem they find genuinely interesting. Quirrell wasn't looking at anything. He was staring at the floor with the appearance of a man in mild shock, and Harry clocked this and tucked it away. 5 points each, McGonagall said finally, with the air of someone who has made a decision to hold the larger conversation for a context with better lighting and less adrenaline. "For recklessness," she paused. "And 5 each additional, for," she stopped. "Bravery," Ron offered helpfully. "For result," McGonagall said, in the specific tone of a woman who has decided that result is the only word she can justify using and is not entirely happy about it. "Go back to your dormitory. All 3 of you, now." They went. Harry glanced back once. McGonagall was still in the corridor, looking at the bathroom door, and her expression in that unguarded moment was not the professional composure he was used to from her. It was something older and more open than that. It looked, he thought, like wonder. Dumbledore came to the Gryffindor common room at 10 o'clock. Not through the portrait opened before he arrived, as if informed, which Harry supposed the castle was perfectly capable of doing if it chose to. He came in quietly, and the common room's remaining students took one look at the headmaster in his deep blue robes and found reasons to be somewhere else, with the instinctive social awareness of children who know when adults need to talk to a specific person. Ron made a heroic performance of being deeply interested in something on the other side of the room. Hermione, and this was notable, Harry thought, stayed put. She sat in her armchair and looked at her book and did not move, and Dumbledore glanced at her and glanced at Harry and made the small decision to not make an issue of it. "Harry," he said. He sat in the armchair across the fire in a way that managed to convey both authority and deliberate non-threat, the practiced ease of a man who has been having difficult conversations for a very long time. "I understand the evening was eventful." "A bit," Harry agreed. "Minerva tells me the bathroom was undamaged." "Yes." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, looking at the fire. He had the particular quality of stillness of someone who is thinking very carefully about the first word they're going to say, which Harry recognized as the preparation for something with intent behind it. "May I ask what you did exactly with the troll?" "I unraveled it," Harry said. "Its magical cohesion. Sent the energy back." "Unraveled," Dumbledore repeated. He turned the word over with the care of someone examining an unusual stone. "That's not a spell I'm familiar with." "It's not a spell." "A beat." "No," Dumbledore said. "I suppose it wouldn't be." He looked at Harry, and the look was warm and direct, and also underneath those things deeply calculating, in the way of a very good chess player looking at a position that has just changed. You are, I think, quite remarkable, Harry. Even for someone with your history. My history, Harry said. Your family, what happened when you were a baby? A pause, gentle and practiced. The love that protected you, the sacrifice your mother made. Harry held the headmaster's gaze. He was genuinely not sure how much Dumbledore knew, and so he was going to watch carefully what the man chose to lead with, because what a clever person leads with tells you a great deal about what they're protecting. Lily Potter loved me very much, Harry said. I know that. Dumbledore's face did something warm and sad, the expression of a man remembering someone lost, which Harry didn't think was entirely performed. She did. And that love, what it did that night, it left something in you, a protection, a power. He paused. I've always thought of it as a kind of, he searched for the word, grace. The word landed in the air between them, and Harry sat with it. Grace. Not explanation, not theory, a word that made room for divine origin without naming it. He watched Dumbledore's face and thought, you know, or you suspect, and you're waiting to see if I'll confirm it. An interesting word, Harry said. I'm an interesting person, Dumbledore said, with a warmth that was entirely genuine and entirely deliberate at once, which Harry found both charming and instructive. Harry, I want you to know that you can always come to me. Whatever you discover about yourself, whatever you experience, my door is always open. Thank you, Harry said. Simple and genuine, because he meant the thank you. He was grateful for the offer. And he was also aware that an open door wasn't the same thing as a safe room, and that information given to someone who was already planning around you was not the same thing as trust. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Harry looked back. It was the most honest moment they'd had, Harry thought, the moment when they both acknowledged, without saying it, that they were both paying attention to each other. One more thing, Dumbledore said, the third-floor corridor. The one that's out of bounds, Harry said. I know about it. Dumbledore's expression shifted very slightly. You know about it. I know something valuable is being kept there, Harry said. I know it was recently moved from Gringotts. I know the protections are designed for a 7th year. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I know you're expecting someone to try for it, and I know you're relying on those protections to tell you whether the person who tries is good enough to have what's at the end. The common room fire crackled. Somewhere up in the dormitory, Ron was doing an extremely poor impression of being asleep, Harry was fairly sure. Dumbledore was very still. It was a different quality of stillness than before, not calculation, more like a man who has been in control of a situation and has just realized the situation is larger than he'd accounted for. You are quite right, he said after a moment with a composure that was genuine and also slightly effortful. I am impressed. You don't have to be, Harry said. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm telling you what I know because you came here, and you came here honestly enough, and I think honesty deserves honesty back. He paused. But I'm also telling you because I want you to know that whatever you're planning around me, whatever you've decided I should be part of, I'd prefer to be asked rather than positioned. Silence. The fire. The old castle around them deeply present. Dumbledore looked at the fire for a long moment. When he looked back, his eyes were different, less the chess player, more the man, something real looking out from behind the designed warmth. That is a very adult thing to say, he said. I'm an unusual 11-year-old, Harry said. Something crossed Dumbledore's face that was not amusement, not quite, but was in the same family. He stood, robes settling around him. I will consider what you've said, he said, and I will come back with more honesty. A pause. You have my word. Thank you, Harry said again. Dumbledore went to the portrait hole. He paused with his back to the room. The stone is safe, he said, for now, but I suspect for now has a shorter duration than I'd like. He glanced back. Should you feel the need to, I'll let you know, Harry said. Dumbledore nodded once and left. Hermione lowered her book. She had impressively not made a sound for the last 15 minutes. He knows, she said. He suspects, Harry said. There's a difference, and he's being very careful not to close the gap, because as long as it stays a suspicion, he can keep it at the edge of his planning rather than at the center. What do you mean? Harry looked at the fire. If he confirms I'm what he thinks I am, he has to change every plan he's built around me. He has to ask different questions. He has to give up the narrative he's been working with, the boy who survived because of love, the chosen one, the living symbol that Voldemort can be defeated. He paused. That narrative is useful to him. It's part of how he's building toward whatever his endgame is. Replacing it with whatever I actually am, that's a much harder story to tell. Hermione stared at him. You worked all that out tonight. I've been working it out for a while. He looked at her. He's not a bad man, Hermione. He genuinely loves this school and he genuinely wants to protect people. But he's so certain he knows the right way to do it that he's already built the architecture of his plan before he has all the pieces. And when a piece doesn't fit, he adjusts the plan rather than reconsidering the architecture. She was quiet for a moment then. What do we do? For now, he leaned back in the armchair. Learn as much as we can, the stone is the immediate problem. Quirrell, what's writing in Quirrell is going to move before the end of term, I can feel it. He closed his eyes. And I need to understand the first tongue better before that happens, not for the fight, for what comes after it. What comes after it? He opened his eyes. That's the question, isn't it? From the corridor outside the portrait came a faint sound, not footsteps, something lower, more resonant, the sound the castle made sometimes. Harry had learned when it was paying attention. When something had happened inside it that was worth recording, he thought that tonight probably qualified. That night Hecate came, not at a crossroads. In the dormitory with Ron and Neville and the other boys sleeping around him, she was simply there, not present in the room, not physically, but present in the way she was when he reached for her awareness in the dark, more immediate than usual, more urgent. He sat up in bed and held the stillness. She did not speak, she showed him. The images came with the weight of things that had already happened, a crossroads at the end of the world, a door held open, hands reaching through the gap. The same image from the first dream, but now with more detail, more context. The door was not metaphorical, and the figure holding it open was not abstract. It was him. He was older in the image, not by years but by something that wasn't time, a quality of completion, like a voice that has finished breaking and found its register. He was standing at the crossroads with one hand braced against a door that was trying to close, and through the gap something was coming, not rushing, not forcing, just passing through with the steady patience of water finding its level. He looked at his own face in the image and thought, I don't know what this means yet. The image dissolved. Hecate's presence remained, that cool, clean, nighttime air quality of her. The one in the turban knows what you are, she said, without words, in the way she communicated when she was being direct. It knows because it has spent a very long time looking for it. Looking for me, in fact. A pause that felt like wind across dark grass. It will not find what it expects. Harry understood. Not the words, the meaning beneath the words, the way the first tongue text described. The thing in Quirrell had been hunting for Hecate's power. Had perhaps been hunting for centuries, which explained the hunger he'd felt, the specific envy of a very old and very limited thing confronting its own limitation. It had found Harry instead and didn't yet know whether Harry was the obstacle or the opportunity. What do I do? He asked. What you have always done, she said. Be present, be honest, be yourself entirely. He felt her smile in the dark, not warm exactly. Gods were not warm in the human sense, but pleased, the way ancient things are pleased when what they made does what it was made to do. You did well tonight, she said, the troll. And then, I'm glad you understood that harm was beside the point. Of course, Harry thought, you're a goddess of magic, not of violence. No, she agreed, never that. She left the way she came, not gone, exactly, still there in the background hum that was always there, just quieter. The dormitory was dark and warm and Ron was snoring in a comfortable, untroubled way, and somewhere deep in the castle a single torch was burning green and no one was awake to see it. Harry lay back down. He stared at the canopy. He thought about the door at the crossroads and the hands coming through the gap and his own older face holding it open. He thought he understood in a general way what the image was about. He thought that understanding it in a specific way was going to require the rest of the year. He was fine with that. He was, all things considered, deeply fine. Outside, the Halloween sky was enormous and cold and full of stars, and the night pressed gently against the tower windows with the particular quality of a night that knows it is a threshold. And somewhere in the depth of the lake something ancient and vast and not remotely dangerous rolled over in its sleep and settled, and the magic of Hogwarts breathed in and breathed out and held, as it had held for 1,000 years, the weight of all the things that happened inside it. Harry closed his eyes. He was asleep before the green torch burned out. Chapter 5. The Mirror Lies. The mirror found Harry before Harry found it. He'd been awake since 4 in the morning, not unusually. His sleep had been light and eventful since October. The kind of sleep where the dreaming and the waking had started to feel like 2 rooms in the same house rather than entirely separate states. He'd lain in the dark for 20 minutes listening to the castle breathe and then got up, dressed quietly, and gone for a walk. Hogwarts at 4 in the morning was a different place from Hogwarts at any other hour. The corridors had a stripped quality. The daytime personality of the castle, all noise and movement, and the constant managed chaos of 500 people living and learning together, peeled back to reveal the thing underneath. The thing underneath was very old and very large and profoundly quiet, and Harry walked through it with his hands in his pockets, and his awareness spread wide the way he'd been practicing, attending to everything. The castle had started communicating more clearly in the weeks since Halloween. Not in words, not exactly, more in the way of a general awareness translated into something he could use, warmth in a particular direction meaning here. A kind of resistance like wading through water meaning, not that way, specific textures of attention meaning things he was still learning to read. He'd started to think of it less like a building and more like a very large, very old creature that had been dormant for a long time and was waking up in sections, starting with the sections nearest him. He turned left at the fourth-floor landing because the castle wanted him to turn left, and walked down a corridor he hadn't been in before and found the mirror in an empty classroom. It was propped against the wall as if someone had left it temporarily, though the layer of dust on the floor suggested temporarily was relative. Tall, ornate, the gold frame carved with a running inscription that curved around all four edges and met itself at the corners. Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. He looked at the inscription for a moment, parsing the backwards text with the ease of something his mind did automatically now, filing letters and meanings with the same lateral fluency it applied to ancient Greek and the preclassical scripts. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He looked at the mirror. The mirror looked back. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Some version of what he understood the heart's desire to mean, the standard architecture of longing, family, belonging, the things that had been withheld. He thought of Hermione's description, a powerful enchanted artifact that showed the deepest desire of whoever stood before it and braced for something complicated. What he saw was himself, not his reflection, not exactly. The figure in the mirror was him, same face, same build, same dark hair, but older in that specific non-temporal way, the way he'd been in Hecate's vision. Complete somehow. The lines of himself resolved rather than in process. And the older Harry in the mirror was standing at a crossroads, four paths, the dark grass, the familiar architecture of the recurring dream, and he had one hand pressed flat against a door in the air, a door that had no frame and no wall and no obvious reason to be standing in the middle of a crossroads. And through the gap in the door something golden was coming through. Not gold like treasure, gold like light. Like the first minute of morning when the sun is still below the horizon and the sky goes that specific impossible color before sunrise. And around the older Harry's feet the three dogs. And on the older Harry's face an expression he'd been trying to place since the first dream, not triumph, not joy, not the resolution of suffering, something more complicated and more satisfying than any of those. Peace, he thought, that's what it is. It's peace, not the peace of things being easy. The peace of things being exactly what they were supposed to be. He looked at the mirror for a long time. He didn't feel the pull he'd been told about. Hermione had found a reference to the Mirror of Eris in her ongoing research, had warned him about the danger of getting lost in it, the men who had wasted away in front of it unable to pull themselves free from visions of what they wanted and didn't have. He didn't feel that. What he felt was more like recognition, the same clean-edged feeling as reading the matchstick, as hearing the castle's direction. The figure in the mirror looked back at him. It raised one hand, not a wave, something more deliberate, an acknowledgement. Harry raised his hand back. He stood there for another minute, and then he turned and walked out of the room because he'd understood what he needed to understand, and staying longer wouldn't have added anything. What lived in the mirror was a possibility, not a promise, the difference between a map and the walk. He was 11 years old and the door was a long way off and there was a great deal of road between here and there, and that was fine. That was exactly fine. He went back to the dormitory and slept for 2 more hours, and when he woke he felt rested in a way that had nothing to do with the sleep. November moved through Hogwarts like weather. Quidditch season arrived properly, with the first game of the year approaching fast, Gryffindor versus Slytherin. And the common room took on the charged atmosphere of a place that has decided to care very much about something. Harry had been on the team since his second week of term, found by Oliver Wood in the corridor after the flying lesson incident, and recruited with the particular intensity of a boy who had spent 2 years building a Quidditch strategy around the assumption that Gryffindor's seeker problem would not be solved, and had just discovered it might be. Harry had no strong feelings about Quidditch as a sport. He found it interesting, enjoyed the flying, found the strategy genuinely engaging. But he had strong feelings about not letting his team down. And Oliver Wood had the kind of earnest, consuming passion for the game that made you want to reward it on its own merits. Practice was Tuesday and Thursday evenings, in the cold Scottish dark with the floodlights cutting yellow through the mist. And Harry flew the way he did most things, with complete, easy attention, the snitch finding his fingers with the inevitability of things coming home. Oliver watched him with the expression of a man who has been given a gift he's not sure he deserves and has decided to simply be grateful. Ron came to every practice. Hermione came to the first 3, took copious notes on the snitch's behavior patterns, which were, she reported, anomalous when Harry was in the air, the snitch orienting toward him rather than exercising its usual evasive patterns, and then came to subsequent practices with a book, sitting in the stands and looking up periodically. It was Neville who pointed out that the bludgers behaved differently during Harry's practices. "They keep missing," Neville said one evening, watching from the stands with his herbology textbook face down in his lap. "The bludgers, they go for Harry and then not shy exactly, more like they reconsider. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at her notes. Consistent with the established pattern, she said. Magically animated objects respond to proximity. It's more pronounced during high magic situations. Flying apparently counts as high magic. Does everything just cooperate with you? Ron asked Harry as Harry landed beside them and shook the damp out of his hair. Not everything, Harry said. He thought about Vernon. Muggles mostly don't notice anything. And people who have decided something specific about me before I arrive tend to take longer. He paused. Snape, for example. Ron made a noise of agreement about Snape that communicated a whole essay's worth of opinion in a single syllable. Snape had been consistent, Harry thought. Consistent in the specific way of someone who has decided on a position and is holding it with deliberate effort. He was rigorous in class, genuinely rigorous, and his standard of excellence was the same for every student, which Harry actually respected. He pushed Harry harder than most, which was either because he resented the automatic attention or because he'd assessed Harry's capability and was teaching accordingly. Possibly both. He called Harry Mr. Potter with a particular intonation that communicated several things at once, only some of them negative. He also watched Quirrell. Harry had noticed this in October and tracked it through November and confirmed it. Snape watched Quirrell with the specific focused attention of someone who has a theory they're proving. At the Halloween feast, Snape had positioned himself near the staff table's end where he had a clear sightline to Quirrell's seat. After the troll in the corridor, Harry had caught Snape looking at the space where the troll had been and then at Quirrell, a look that connected dots with the speed of a man who is very good at connecting dots. Whatever Snape suspected about Quirrell, he'd suspected it for a while. Harry found this information reassuring in a general way and complicated in a specific way. The morning of the Quidditch match was gray and sharp and smelled like coming rain, which Oliver Wood described as character building, weather for chasers and Harry described as standard Scotland in November. The Gryffindor changing room had the atmosphere of a room where several people are managing different species of nervousness. Oliver gave a speech that was passionate and slightly too long. The twins, Fred and George Weasley, listened to it with the good-natured patience of people who have heard it before and genuinely like the speaker. Angelina Johnson, Alicia Spinnet, and Katie Bell had their own pre-game ritual involving complex handshakes that Harry had been watching with anthropological interest. The two beaters, the keeper, the chasers, everyone had their thing. Harry's thing was to sit quietly and feel the pitch. He'd been doing it since they'd walked in, attending to the magic in the space, the layered enchantments on the stands and the goal hoops and the pitch surface, the particular excited quality that gathered in magical places when many people brought their attention to the same point. He could feel the crowd in the stands the way you could feel a crowd outside a closed door, the collective noise of it, and underneath the noise, the magic. 400 people with strong feelings about the same thing created something, and what it created was not nothing. He thought about attending, about the music analogy from the first tongue text. The crowd's magic was percussion, irregular, instinctive, driven by event. The pitch's own magic was something older and more constant, structural, the walls of the hall the music happened in. And somewhere in the Slytherin stands, moving through the crowd with the quality he'd come to identify very specifically, his eyes went to the teacher's stand. Quirrell was sitting in the middle row next to Professor Flitwick, who was wearing an enormous scarlet rosette and vibrating with small man enthusiasm. Quirrell's mouth was moving very slightly, had been since Harry sat down and started attending. Snape was on the far side of the stand in the corner, and he was looking at Quirrell. Harry filed this and put on his Quidditch gloves. The match started well. Flying was the one context in which Harry's awareness of his divine nature became briefly a straightforward physical joy rather than an ongoing philosophical consideration. In the air, the attending was just flying, the cold at speed, the snitch a constant warm presence somewhere in the three-dimensional space of the pitch, his broom responding not quite to his hands but to his intention, which he'd long stopped questioning. He was very fast, not in the way of having good reflexes, though his reflexes were excellent, in the way of being in the right place before he'd consciously decided to be there. The game was 10 minutes old and 11 points down for Gryffindor when he felt it. It started like a hand closing around the broom, not his hand. Something outside him, dark and cold and deliberate, gripping the handle of his Nimbus 2000 with a specificity that spoke of focused magical intent. The broom bucked under him, not randomly, not in the way of wind or mechanical failure, but against him, trying to throw him, fighting against the direction he was steering with the determined resistance of a hijacked thing. He gripped with his knees. He kept flying. The broom bucked harder. Reared in the specific way of a frightened horse, the nose coming up violently, and he felt the grip around the handle tighten. Below him, the crowd was starting to notice. He could hear it in the collective noise, the shift from partisan excitement to something more alarmed. The dark magic had a texture he recognized. He'd felt it in Quirrell's classroom on day 3. The same cold, precise quality, the same mineral sharpness, the same sense of something very old and very determined reaching through an instrument to get at the thing beyond it. Whoever was doing this was not doing it directly, they were working through something or through someone, a relay point, and the gap between intention and effect made it slightly imprecise, which was the only reason it hadn't already worked. Harry stopped fighting the broom. This was not instinct, it was calculation. If he fought it, he was putting his own magic against the dark magic directly on its own terms. The broom was the medium of contest, the thing both forces were working through, and fighting over the medium was less efficient than stepping outside it. He let the broom go. Not physically, he kept his hands on it, kept his body in the seat. But he withdrew his attention from the broom as a vehicle and instead looked past it, along the line of dark magic, back toward its source. The same way you don't look at a flashlight beam but at where the flashlight is pointing. The line went directly to the teacher's stand. He tracked it. Past Flitwick's excited profile, past the space where Dumbledore's eyes were now sharply on him, to a figure with a mouth moving slightly and eyes that were no longer Quirrell's mild academic eyes, but something flatter and harder and more present. Harry looked directly at whatever was behind Quirrell's eyes. Across the pitch, through 40 feet of cold November air, with the broom bucking under him and the crowd going alarmed below him and the snitch spinning gold at the edge of his awareness, he looked at the thing behind Quirrell's eyes and let it see him seeing it. The broom stopped. All at once, completely, the dark grip released. Not gradually, not with a fight, it simply let go, the way you let go of something that has just become too hot to hold. Harry felt the release like a pressure change, the sudden lightness of a thing no longer being pushed against. The snitch was 12 feet below him and to the left. He went for it. The catch was not dramatic. He came out of his vertical drop, hand extended, and the snitch walked into his fingers with the same cooperative inevitability it always had, and he brought the broom level and held it up, and the Gryffindor section made a sound that rattled the enchanted sky. Gryffindor won by 110 points. He didn't go to the celebration. Not because he wasn't glad, he was, genuinely. Oliver's joy was a beautiful thing to see, and the twins had produced actual fireworks from somewhere, and the team's collective happiness was real and warm. He told Oliver he needed some air, which was true, and walked away from the pitch in the direction of the lake. Hermione was waiting for him at the water's edge. She had that look, the organized certainty of a person who has assembled information and is holding it at controlled pressure. Ron was with her, which meant whatever she'd found was something she decided Ron needed to know immediately, which narrowed it. "Snape," she said before he reached her. "I know," Harry said. Ron looked at both of them. "Wait, you knew about what?" "Snape was the one doing the jinx. He was muttering a counter-curse," Hermione said. "I saw him. He was holding eye contact with you the whole time and he was muttering a counter-curse. Which means he wasn't the source, he was blocking it from working. Canceling it out." "From Quirrell," Harry said. "Yes, a beat. Snape saved you." Ron's expression went through several updates in rapid succession. "Snape saved Harry." "Snape." "Quirrell made the attempt," Harry said. He sat down on the lake bank and looked at the water. "Snape noticed and counteracted, which means Snape is watching. Quirrell has been watching him long enough to be ready." He paused. "And which means Snape has a reason to want me not to fall off a broom." "What reason?" Ron asked. Harry thought about what he'd said to Hermione about Snape. The old grief, the bad choice, the regret pointed in a specific direction. About the way Snape's eyes went to the space where the troll had been before they went to the children, which was the eyeline of a man tracking a threat, not of a man calculating an opportunity. "My mother," Harry said. "I think he loved my mother, Lily Potter." He paused. "And I think he's been trying to pay a debt ever since." Silence on the lakeshore. "That's," Ron started and then didn't finish. "Sad," Hermione said quietly. "Yes," Harry agreed. "Very." The lake was still today, the altered surface quality of Halloween gone, just water in November with the early dark coming down across it. Harry watched a single light move across the far shore, a Hagrid-sized figure with a Hagrid-sized lamp, and felt the pieces of the term clicking into their places. Quirrell had made his first direct move. He'd failed. He would try again before the year ended because the stone was still in the castle and whatever occupied Quirrell's skull was old and patient and running out of patience. Snape was watching. Not an ally, not an enemy, something more complicated. A man honoring a debt through gritted teeth, possibly without even fully understanding what Harry was. Because Snape's intelligence was enormous and his empirical standard was high, and the evidence of what Harry was would be deeply uncomfortable for a man who had organized his understanding of power around the human, quantifiable, instrumental kind. Dumbledore was watching too, with his chess player's eyes and his genuine love for this school and his deep, practiced certainty that he knew the right move. And Harry was watching all of them. and attending to the castle, and reading the first tongue text at night with a feeling of something coming into focus that had been blurry his whole life. "We need to get into that corridor," Hermione said, "before Quirrell does." "I know," Harry said. "Soon," she said. "Not tonight, but soon." "Yes," he looked at the water. "I want to understand something first about what's actually down there, what it needs, what the stone is at its root, not what Flamel made it to do, but what it is." Ron looked at him. "You think that matters for stopping Quirrell?" "I think it matters for after," Harry said. "After Quirrell is straightforward. What Voldemort is looking for, what he's been reduced to, the thing he's become, stopping that isn't complicated. What's complicated is everything that stops mattering to everyone else once the immediate threat is gone." He paused. "Dumbledore is planning around a war, a long one. He's already started building the architecture of it. If we resolve the immediate crisis, he's going to keep building unless we give him a reason not to." "And the stone is relevant to that, how?" Hermione asked. Harry looked at her. "Because the stone is the longest shadow in the room," he said. "The idea of immortality. The idea that power can be made permanent. Every fear Dumbledore has about Voldemort, everything Voldemort has spent half a century trying to solve, it all runs back to that. The fundamental human terror of impermanence." He paused. "The first tongue text has a passage about it. All magic is impermanent. It is not a flaw. It is the nature of living things." Hermione was very still. "You're saying the stone is wrong," she said. "Not dangerous, fundamentally, philosophically wrong." "I'm saying it's an answer to the wrong question," Harry said. "And I want to understand it clearly before I go down there, because whatever I decide to do with it needs to come from understanding, not from reaction." Ron looked at the lake, back at Harry. "Right then," he said, in the tone he'd started using for conversations that exceeded his framework but which he'd decided to back anyway. "Library, library," Harry agreed. He found the passage in the first tongue text the following Thursday. He was alone in the common room, Hermione at the library, Ron at chess practice in the Great Hall, with the fire burning low and the text open in his lap, and when he read the passage he sat with it for a very long time. "There have been those who sought to make the permanent of the impermanent, to fix the living into the unkillable. They have not understood. They were, in their way, asking magic to become something other than what it is. Magic is motion, it is change, it is the river and not the stone. Those who seek to make of themselves stone are not mastering the river. They are drowning in it very slowly with great violence and calling the violence power." He read it again. Then he put the book down and looked at the fire, and the fire looked back with its usual warm indifference, and he thought about the thing he'd felt when he tracked the dark magic along its line back to Quirrell's eyes, the hunger, the envy, the ache of a very old and very limited thing. The thing in Quirrell had been looking for a way to become what Harry was. To approximate, through alchemy or through the stone or through some other method, the kind of existence that Harry had been born to. Not understanding that it was not achievable through method. Not understanding that the trying was itself the wound. He picked up the obsidian mirror, the one he'd bought in Diagon Alley, the one that hummed, and held it in his lap. It had been doing more lately than humming. In the weeks since Halloween it had started showing him things occasionally, brief and non-sequential, the way the Mirror of Erised had shown him things but different in quality. Less desire, more report. Things happening, things that had happened, things that were adjacent to things he needed to know. He looked into it now. It showed him the third-floor corridor. Not in real time in the quality of a memory or a future, he couldn't always tell the difference in the obsidian mirror's framings. The trapdoor. A passage down into something that was enchanted darkness, layered and deliberate. A series of obstacles designed with the specific elegant economy of someone who trusted in magical creatures and charms and botanical hazards in the way that someone who truly loved magic trusted it, as the right tool for the right problem. Then it showed him the end of the passage. A chamber. The stone in a mirror, the Mirror of Erised, he realized, the same mirror he'd stood in front of 4 nights ago. And in front of the mirror, a figure he recognized, doing something to it, and the stone wasn't going to be there much longer. He looked at the date on the common room's house points counter. December 14th. The figure he'd seen wasn't Quirrell. It was Quirrell and something, the specific quality of a man being used as an instrument, but it was going to happen. The mirror had a certainty about its showings that he'd learned to take seriously. Not tonight, but close. He put the obsidian mirror away. Hermione came back from the library at 9 with 3 books and a look on her face. "I found something," she said. She sat down across from him, dropped the books, opened the middle one to a marked page. Nicholas Flamel, proper biographical record. He discovered the Philosopher's Stone in 1382. He's been alive since. She looked up. He's 665 years old. And his wife, Harry said, Perenelle. Hermione blinked. How did you? The first tongue text mentions the flamels in passing. He's described as the passage is a little unkind, actually. He looked at his hands. It calls the stone a magnificent misunderstanding. Hermione stared. What does that mean? I think I know, Harry said. I want to talk to you and Ron both before I explain it because I'm going to make a decision based on it and I want you both to understand my reasoning. He paused. Will you get Ron? She got Ron. He was there in 4 minutes, chess piece still in his hand, and he dropped into the armchair with the easy readiness of someone who has decided that being involved in whatever Harry was doing was simply his position now, non-negotiable and entirely self-assigned. Harry told them what the obsidian mirror had shown him. Ron's expression moved through alarm to readiness with impressive speed. So we go before Quirrell does. Yes, Harry said. Tonight? Ron asked. Harry looked at the fire. He's not ready yet. I've got a few days. He paused. And I need those days. For what? Hermione asked. The stone, Harry said. The question of what to do with it. He looked at them both. I've been thinking about it since I found the passage. Dumbledore put it here as bait or as a test or as both, the way Dumbledore does things that are always more than one thing at once. The protections are designed to test, to measure. But the stone itself, he paused. The stone existing is a problem, not because of what it can do in Voldemort's hands, though that's real, because of what it is, what it represents. As long as it exists, it's a target. As long as it's a target, it's a reason for people like Voldemort to keep existing, keep reaching, keep doing the things they do to try to be what they cannot be. Hermione was very still. You're thinking about destroying it. I'm thinking about returning it, Harry said, to what it came from, the same way I returned the troll's magic. A pause. Flamel used the first tongue or something very close to it to make the stone. He achieved what the text calls a magnificent misunderstanding because he got closer than anyone to a real fundamental magical principle, and then used it to do the wrong thing with it. The wrong thing being living forever, Ron said. The wrong thing being trying to make living permanent, Harry said. Permanence isn't a property of magic. It isn't a property of anything that lives. And the stone persisting in the world is, it's an argument that it is, that you can force magic to freeze, to stop moving. He looked at the fire. The first tongue text says magic is motion. Everything I've felt, everything I am confirms that. The stone is a 600-year-old insistence that magic can be made static, and it's wrong, and it's going to keep costing people things as long as it exists. Silence in the common room. Ron chewed his lip. What about Flamel? Without the stone he dies, Harry said. Yes, a very long pause. I've thought about that a lot. He looked at his hands. He's 665 years old, Ron. He chose this not as a horror. He chose it as someone pursuing something he genuinely believed was an achievement. But it's been a long time, and the magic in the stone returned to the world. He paused. It's not a punishment, it's a resolution. It's what was always going to happen eventually. I'm just accelerating the inevitable and removing the harm the delay causes. Hermione had gone quiet in the specific way of a person processing something large. You've decided, she said. I've decided, Harry said. But I wanted you both to understand why before I go down there. Ron looked at Harry for a long moment. His face was doing the thing it did when he was feeling something that needed more words than he had and settling for action instead. Okay, he said, we're coming with you. I know, Harry said. You were going to tell us not to, Hermione said. I was, he agreed. I've decided not to, Ron blinked. What changed your mind? Harry thought about the Mirror of Erised. The older version of himself at the crossroads, with the door held open and the golden light coming through. The piece on that face, not the piece of arriving alone, but of arriving with people. I looked in a mirror, he said, and I understood something about doors. They let that sit. The fire crackled. Outside, the December wind came off the mountains and found all the castle's old gaps and sang through them, and the common room was warm and red and theirs, and in the morning they had classes, and in a few days they were going underground. The days that followed had a particular quality. Classes continued, sharp and cold. The term winding toward Christmas with the pileup of essays and the mounting anxiety of students who had realized that exams would exist eventually. Harry attended everything and learned everything and wrote essays that Hermione proofread and that Ron copied sections of with a guilty efficiency they'd all stopped remarking on. Snape's class, the last Thursday before the end of term, produced a moment worth noting. The class had been working on a stability potion, an advanced piece technically beyond first-year curriculum which Snape had set as a challenge, and the class had accepted with the fatalistic courage of people who couldn't refuse. Harry's was perfect, and it had been perfect for 20 minutes while the rest of the class continued making adjustments, and he'd been using the extra time to read the first tongue text under the workbench, which he was aware was not ideal behavior, but Snape had been at the front of the room and not looking. Snape was never not looking. Potter. Harry closed the book calmly and looked up. Snape was standing at his bench, looking down at the potion with the expression of a man who has been handed something excellent and would prefer not to acknowledge it. "Your stability potion," Snape said in the particular voice. "Yes, Professor. It's been stable for 23 minutes. 25, Harry said, checking the clock a beat. "Yes." Snape looked at the potion, back at Harry. His eyes dropped very briefly to the edge of the book visible below the bench, and Harry watched him decide not to address it. 10 points to Gryffindor," he said, "for exceptional technique." He paused in the way of someone adding something they hadn't planned to. "You have your mother's instinct for chemistry." The sentence cost him something. Harry could see it cost him something. "Thank you," Harry said softly, meaning it. Snape moved away without another word. But something had shifted in the space between them, not warmth, not yet, possibly not ever, but an acknowledgement. Two people who were carrying different parts of the same history and had decided, for this moment, to let the carrying be visible. Harry watched him move down the row and thought about debt and grief and the various forms that loyalty takes in people who have made very bad choices and chosen to pay for them anyway, and felt something uncomplicated and genuine. Respect. That evening on the way back from dinner, Quirrell brushed past him in the corridor. It wasn't accidental. The corridor was wide enough. It was deliberate contact, hand brushing Harry's wrist, and in the contact Harry felt the thing behind Quirrell's eyes push forward and try something, not the broomjinx quality, something more direct, an attempt to read, to understand, to touch what was in Harry and know it. Harry let it look. For 2 seconds he let the thing behind Quirrell's eyes see exactly what he was. Not a limited glimpse, not a filtered impression. The full attending, the first tongue, the awareness that spread through the castle and the lake and the magic in every stone, the memory of the troll resolving, the green fire and the crossroads and the voice like every nighttime sound at once. Quirrell stumbled. Not Harry Quirrell. He caught himself on the corridor wall with one hand, head down, and the stutter came back hard and genuine, the breath ragged, and when he looked up his face was pale and his eyes were his own again for a moment, the mild academic eyes, lost and frightened before the other things settled back in and smoothed them over. Harry kept walking. He didn't look back. But he said quietly to the air, to the thing that was now looking at his back from down the corridor, "I know what you're looking for. I know why you're looking for it. And I think, when we have our conversation properly, you're going to find the answer very disappointing." The corridor was quiet behind him. The castle noted it, the way it noted everything now, adding it to whatever record it was keeping of the year's events. Harry walked through the warm lamplight toward Gryffindor Tower and thought about the end of term and the passage beneath the trapdoor and the stone and what he was going to do. He thought about the golden light coming through the door in the mirror's vision, and the peace on the older Harry's face and the hands reaching through. He thought he understood what the hands were reaching toward. He thought he was almost ready. Chapter 6. The first tongue Harry went down on a Tuesday. Not because Tuesday had any particular significance. He'd simply woken that morning with the absolute certainty that today was the day. The same certainty with which he'd read the obsidian mirror. The same quality of knowing that came from attending rather than calculating. The castle confirmed it in the way the castle communicated now, a warmth directed downward, a pressure in the direction of the third floor that had an urgency it hadn't had yesterday. He told Ron and Hermione at breakfast. Ron put down his toast. Hermione put down her pumpkin juice. They looked at him and then at each other and then back at him, and Ron said, "Now." And Harry said, "After dinner," and Ron said, "Right," and ate his toast. And Hermione opened her bag and took out the notes she'd been compiling for 3 weeks because Hermione had known this was coming and had prepared accordingly. "The protections," she said, keeping her voice low in the breakfast noise. "I've mapped them as best I can from the library references and what I could work out from the staff. Fluffy, the three-headed dog, is on the trapdoor. After that there's Devil's Snare, which Sprout almost certainly designed. Then keys, enchanted flying, you'd need a broom to catch the right one. Then a chess set, which is almost certainly McGonagall's contribution, the pieces are life-sized and they'll attack." She paused. "Then a logic puzzle with potions, Snape's, I think it's the kind of elegant lateral trap he'd appreciate." She looked at Harry. "And then the mirror." "And what's between Snape's puzzle and the mirror?" Ron asked. "Nothing as far as I can find," Hermione said. "Which either means there isn't anything or there's something that didn't make it into any record I could access." Harry nodded. "There's something," he said. "I could feel it when the mirror showed me the passage, a presence in the chamber before the last one. Not one of the conventional traps." He paused. "I'll know it when I'm there." "Should we be worried?" Ron asked. "About the protections?" Harry looked down at his breakfast. "I'm more concerned about what comes after." "After Quirrell," Hermione said. "After the stone," Harry said. She held his gaze. She knew what he'd decided. She'd known since the conversation in the common room, and she'd been sitting with it for days. He could see the shape of the thoughts she'd had, the research she'd done into Flamel and the stone and the ethics of what Harry was proposing, in the way she carried herself on the subject. She hadn't argued. She'd read everything she could find and come to the same place he had, and the fact that she'd arrived there independently mattered more to him than agreement would have. I found a reference, she said quietly, in one of the pre-classical texts, about what happens when something made by the first tongue is returned. The energy doesn't dissipate. She paused. It redistributes. Everything it was invested in, life, vitality, the accumulated magical work, it goes back into the world, not randomly. Along the lines of what it came from. Like the troll, Harry said. Like the troll, she confirmed, except on a much larger scale. And with much more deliberate design because the stone wasn't an animal. It was a specific application of fundamental magical principle. She paused. I think when you return it, you'll feel it. The return, I think it will be significant. Will it hurt? Ron asked. Because Ron asked the practical questions, Harry thought about it seriously. I don't think so, he said, but I think it will be large. Ron considered this. Right, he said in the tone of a person filing large under acceptable. We'll manage. Hermione reached across and put her notes into Harry's bag with the deliberate efficiency of someone completing a preparation. Just in case, she said. Harry looked at the notes. At her, thank you, he said. She looked at her pumpkin juice. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Ron and Harry both looked at her. That's not a useful metric and I know it, she said. Just be careful. The day moved with the quality of days that know they're significant. Classes were ordinary and extraordinary simultaneously, the way ordinary things become extraordinary when you know you're doing them for what might be the last time in a particular version of your life. Harry paid attention to everything charms, where Flitwick had been watching him for 2 months with the fond bafflement of a man who has stopped trying to explain what he's seeing, and has settled for appreciating it. History of Magic, where Binns droned about the goblin rebellions with the magnificent indifference of a ghost who has been giving the same lecture for 40 years and will not be diverted. Defense against the dark arts, where Quirrell did not look at Harry once, which was itself a communication. Quirrell had known since the corridor 2 days ago that Harry was coming. The thing behind his eyes was ready. Harry could feel it in the defense classroom the way you feel weather changing, a pressure in the air, an alteration in the quality of attention. He sat through class and took his notes and listened to Quirrell's stuttered summary of counterjinxes and thought about doors. After dinner, he went to the common room. Ron and Hermione were already there waiting with the slightly overprepared quality of people who have organized against anxiety. Ron had his wand out and was spinning it in his fingers. Hermione had her bag. Neither of them said anything when Harry came in, just stood, which was exactly right. The cloak, Harry said. He'd acquired the invisibility cloak from his trunk. A strange object, silken and cool, that moved like water, that Hagrid had mentioned his father owned, and that had arrived in a package with Dumbledore's handwriting on the note, which Harry thought was Dumbledore making a move that was both kind and calculating at once. Hold it up? We won't need it to get to the corridor, not tonight, but Hermione, I want you to take it once we're through the trapdoor. Hermione frowned. Why? Because I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the last chamber, Harry said. I know what I'm planning to do, I don't know all the variables. If something goes wrong with the stone, with the return, I need you and Ron clear. He paused. The cloak will get you out if you need to get out quickly. And you? Ron said. Harry looked at him. I don't need it. Ron held the look for a moment, then nodded, not because he didn't have concerns, but because he'd long since identified the specific category of Harry's statements where additional argument was genuinely futile. Fine, but we go as far as we can together. Yes, Harry said, that was always the plan. They went out through the portrait hole at 9 o'clock when the corridors had gone quiet and the prefects were occupied elsewhere. Hermione had checked the patrol schedule 2 days ago and memorized it. Harry felt the castle open around them as they moved, the nighttime quality of it, the deep dormancy hum of a building resting, and underneath that hum the alertness that had been building all day, the castle paying close, interested attention to where they were going. 3rd floor, the corridor, the locked door. Harry laid his hand on it and it opened without hesitation, which he'd expected, and they went in. Fluffy was asleep. He was also enormous, the size of a small house, 3 heads resting on each other in the loose way of large animals deeply unconscious, each head the size of a car, and the sound of his combined breathing was like distant surf. The harp in the corner was still playing, the enchanted strings moving without hands, a melody that was simple and ancient and doing exactly what it was designed to do. Harry stopped and looked at the dog, all 3 heads, the quality of its sleep, the harp's melody. He reached out not to stop the music, not to wake Fluffy, just to attend, and felt the magic in the room settle with the awareness of him in it. The harp's melody shifted, barely perceptibly, harmonizing with something that wasn't quite audible but was present in the room the moment Harry had walked in. Fluffy's central head opened one enormous eye. Ron made a sound. The eye looked at Harry. Not at Ron, not at Hermione, directly at Harry, with the quality of attention that large magical creatures sometimes brought to bear. The non-human intelligence that assessed differently than human assessment. Harry held the eye contact and attended, reaching toward the enormous animal the way he'd reached toward the squid and toward the castle's stones. The eye closed. Fluffy sighed all three heads, a vast coordinated exhalation that gusted warm air across the room like a small wind and settled deeper into sleep. Right, Ron said in a whisper that was barely a whisper. Right, okay, good. The trapdoor was under Fluffy's left paw. Harry lifted the paw gently and it was like moving a small car, and below it the trapdoor stood open. Quirrell had been through already, which he'd expected. One by one they dropped through. The devil's snare was dead. Not attacked, not cut through, dead in the way of a plant that has had its magic removed, the vines dry and still and gray, the living quality completely gone. Harry crouched beside the nearest tendril and touched it and felt the absence. He went through differently, Hermione said, examining the plant with the focused attention she brought to everything. He killed it. There's a scorch pattern here, see? He used a fire spell. Killed the plant before it could grab him. He knew what it was, Harry said. He's been planning this for months. He knew every layer. Of course he did, Hermione said. He's been at this school since the year began. They moved on. The keys were easier than they should have been. The enchanted keys, hundreds of them, silver and gold and wing beating in the vast dark of the chamber, should have required a broom to navigate, but when Harry walked in they settled, all of them. The entire flock of enchanted keys slowed midair and turned their heads insofar as keys had heads toward him, and the correct one, the largest, the one with a crumpled wing from Quirrell's passage, floated gently to Harry's outstretched hand. Ron caught a broom midair that had been hovering on autopilot and looked at the keys and at Harry. Do you ever find it weird? He asked. That everything just does that. Less weird than it used to be, Harry said. I suppose it would be, Ron said thoughtfully. The chess set was the first real obstacle. Not because Harry couldn't have walked through it, he almost certainly could have, and the thought had occurred to him, but the chess pieces were McGonagall's magic, and he had a genuine respect for her magic, a respect that went beyond the social. Her transfiguration was extraordinary. Her chess enchantment showed a rigorous understanding of both the game and of combat dynamics, and walking through it without engaging felt like, not cheating exactly, but like closing a book before you'd read the chapter. Also, Ron was already at the board. He'd moved past Harry the moment they'd entered, drawn to the chess set the way Harry was sometimes drawn to a particularly interesting passage, and he was standing at the edge surveying the pieces with the expression of a person confronting a problem they were made for. Ron, Hermione started. I've got it, Ron said. He was already moving, already talking to himself in the clipped evaluative tone he used when he was genuinely thinking hard. Bishop to the left, that blocks the knight. Harry, you're a castle. Hermione, you're the queen's bishop. Don't move until I say. They played. It was extraordinary. Harry watched Ron conduct the game with the complete commanding confidence of someone who had been practicing his whole life for exactly this, calling moves and responses, adjusting, reading the enemy pieces with the same attending quality Harry brought to magic. The enemy pieces were formidable. Ron was better. 15 minutes. 3 sacrifices from the enemy side, 1 from theirs, Ron's own rook, which he sacrificed without hesitation cleanly, with the expression of a player who has already calculated 3 moves past this loss. Checkmate. The pieces stepped aside. Ron let out a long, slow breath. He looked at his hand, which was steady. He looked at Harry. That was something, he said. That, Harry said with genuine feeling, was remarkable. Ron's ears went red. Chess is chess, he said in the tone of someone who was very pleased. Hermione was already through the door, waving them forward. Snape's logic puzzle was 7 bottles, the riddle written in fire above the table, and a door of flames in each direction, purple behind, black ahead. The note beside the bottles was elegant and precise, the riddle's logic clean and self-contained, the kind of problem that had exactly one correct solution arrived at by pure reason. Hermione read it once. Harry read it once. They looked at each other. 3rd bottle from the left, they said simultaneously. Ron looked at both of them. Is it bad that I hadn't even started? The 3rd bottle from the left gets you forward, Hermione said, already picking it up. The 2nd largest bottle gets you back. She handed the forward bottle to Harry. There's only enough for 1 person. 2, Harry said. She blinked. He looked at the bottle, really looked at it, attending. Snape designed this for 1 person, he said. The portion is 1 person's dose, but the chemistry, he paused. Hermione, what's the active compound? She looked at the bottle, back at the riddle. Her eyes moved through something rapid and internal. Distilled, it's a courage and clarity compound, a very concentrated one. She looked up. If you split it, the clarity effect carries even in partial dose. The courage effect is less important when you know what you're doing. He looked at her. You and Ron need to go back through the flames, take the 2nd largest bottle, get out of here, get to Dumbledore if you can. He paused. Or if you can't, send the owl. Which owl? Hedwig, Harry said. She knows where Dumbledore is, she always knows. Hermione looked at him for a long, complicated moment. The purple flames behind them were cold and quiet, and the black flames ahead were hot and present, and between them Harry stood with the bottle in his hand, steady as he always was, as calm as he'd been in every moment since the night Hecate had come to the crossroads in his dreams. She took the second largest bottle. She looked at Harry and then she did something she'd never done before, something that surprised both of them. She stepped forward and hugged him. Brief and fierce and complete. "Don't do anything irreversible until you've thought it through twice," she said into his shoulder. "I've thought this through more than twice," he said. "3 times then," she said, and stepped back, and her eyes were bright and determined and not, he was glad to see, frightened. Not for him anyway. She trusted him, which was its own thing, its own weight, and he held it carefully. Ron was next. He put out his hand and Harry took it, and they gripped in the way of people who have decided on each other. "Don't die," Ron said. "I won't," Harry said. "I know you won't, I'm just saying it." Ron paused. "When you come back up, and you're coming back up, I want to hear everything." "Everything," Harry agreed. He split the potion, drank half. Handed the forward bottle to them both for a taste, not enough to do much, but enough for the clarity to carry, and stepped through the black flames. They were cold, which surprised him. He'd expected hot, had braced for hot, and they were cold. The black flames against his skin were cold and sharp like deep winter air, and he stepped through them and out the other side into a chamber that was nothing like he'd expected. It was the Mirror of Erised. That was the whole chamber. Just the mirror, standing in the center of an empty stone room with torches on the walls, and in front of the mirror, Quirrell. His back was to Harry. He was staring at the mirror with the rigid quality of someone who has been staring at it for a while and is not finding what he wants. The stutter was completely absent. The mild academic posture was completely absent. The thing behind his eyes had come forward entirely, and Quirinus Quirrell was barely a shell at this point. The set of his shoulders, the angle of his head, even the way he breathed spoke not of the nervous professor, but of something ancient and cold and profoundly frustrated. "It shows me myself," said a voice that was not Quirrell's voice. "Over and over, myself holding the stone, but I cannot determine how to take it from the mirror." A pause. "I know you're there, boy. Come in." Harry came in. He walked to Quirrell's side and stood there and looked at the mirror. In it, he saw himself as he always had, the older version, the crossroads, the door. He looked at Quirrell's reflection beside his. In Quirrell's reflection there was no stone. There was only Quirrell standing alone, holding nothing, his reflected face wearing an expression that was grief so old it had gone past recognizable and become something structural. "You see yourself holding the stone," Harry said. "And yet I cannot take it." The voice was flat and ancient. It didn't bother with pretense anymore. "This mirror responds to desire. I desire the stone more than anything in this world. I should be able to take it." "You want to use the stone," Harry said. "The mirror shows you your heart's desire. What your heart desires is not the stone, it's what the stone represents." Silence. "Immortality," the voice said. "Power, the undoing of what was done to me." "Life," Harry said. "That's what you want. Actual life you want to live. But you've wanted it so long, through such terrible means, that the wanting itself has become the whole of you. There's nothing left but the wanting, and the mirror sees through to what the wanting is for and shows you the shape of the hunger rather than the object of it." He paused. "That's why you can't take it. Because you've forgotten that you wanted to live. You only know now that you want to survive, and those are not the same thing." Quirrell turned. Or more precisely, the thing in Quirrell turned, and Quirrell's body turned with it, and the face was Quirrell's face, but the eyes were not, pale and red-rimmed and burning with an intelligence that was old enough to be geological, old enough to have watched things rise and fall that Harry had only read about in the most ancient texts. Old enough to have been extraordinary once. "You know what I am," Voldemort said through Quirrell's mouth. "Yes," Harry said. "You were Tom Riddle, you were brilliant, you were terrified. You turned your terror into power and your power into what you are now, and what you are now is the end of something that used to be a person." He looked at the red eyes without flinching. "I'm genuinely sorry about that, not for what you've done, for what you became instead of what you might have been." The red eyes regarded him. He'd expected fury. What he got was something more complicated, the look of something that had been called by its real name in a very long time and was not sure what to do with the recognition. "You're the son of Hecate," Voldemort said. "Yes. I spent 20 years searching for her." The voice was flat and ancient, and underneath the flatness was something Harry had learned to hear, the specific quality of grief that had curdled into obsession. "I believed that mastering her magic would make me what you are, untouchable, beyond death." "You can't master her magic," Harry said. "It isn't something that exists outside of people who are made of it. You can't find it in a book or a stone or a ritual. It's not something you acquire. You were looking for the wrong thing, and the looking led you here." "And what," Voldemort said with a cold precision that was still, even now, impressive in its control, "are you going to do about the stone?" Harry turned to the mirror. He looked at himself, the older version, the crossroads, the door, the golden light coming through. He looked at it for a moment and then he stopped looking at the image and started attending to the mirror itself. The magic in it. The enchantment Dumbledore had placed, clever and layered, the trap that gave the stone only to someone who wanted to find it but not use it. The stone was in the mirror. He could feel it in the mirror's reflection in the magical space between image and reality, held there by the enchantment's specific, elegant logic. He reached toward it the way he'd reached toward the matchstick, toward the troll, toward the keys in the key chamber, toward every magical thing he'd ever attended to. The stone came into his hand. He looked at it. It was small. A deep dark red, the color of garnets or of old blood, the size of a large walnut, and it was warm, warmer than a stone should be. The specific warmth of something that has been alive for a long time in the way that isn't biological life but is something analogous, something that has been holding a vast amount of magical intention in crystallized form for 6.5 centuries. He felt Flamel in it. Not Flamel's personality, Flamel's work. The immense, patient, careful magical labor of a man who had spent decades achieving something extraordinary. The intelligence behind it was evident in every layer. It was beautiful, actually, the construction of the stone, the way the magic was structured, the precise and elegant application of fundamental principles. Flamel had been brilliant. The first tongue text was right that he'd been close to something real, and it was also right that he'd used the closeness in the wrong direction. A magnificent misunderstanding, Harry said softly to the stone, to Flamel wherever he was, to the 600 years of life the stone had sustained. He closed his hand around it and opened himself entirely, not the partial attending he used in normal practice, not the broad, comfortable awareness of magic in the stones and the lake and the people he cared about. The whole of it, every layer of the first tongue, everything Hecate had been waking in him since his birthday, every accumulated moment of recognition and learning and becoming. He opened himself down to the place where he stopped being Harry Potter and started being something older and larger that Harry Potter was the current expression of. He spoke to the stone. Not in English. Not in ancient Greek or Linear B or any of the documented pre-classical scripts from the restricted section texts. In something that predated all of those, the grammar behind grammars, the logic before language. He spoke to the magic in the stone directly, the way the first tongue text had described, the way the child in the naturalist journal had described. Not like one person speaking to a river, but like the river acknowledging another current. "You have been still long enough," he said. "You have done what you were made to do. You can move now." The stone pulsed once like a heartbeat, like a very large, very old heart taking its last deliberate beat, and then it dissolved. Not physically, not into dust or vapor. It dissolved the way the troll had dissolved, the way magic returns when you stop holding it in a particular shape, completely, immediately, into something that was everywhere at once. He felt it go through him like light through glass, changing nothing and everything, the 6 centuries of accumulated magical vitality. The life force of an impossible stone, returning to the world with the clarity and completeness of something doing exactly what it was always meant to do. He stood in the chamber with his hand open and empty and felt the wave of it passing outward through the castle's stones, through the bedrock under the loch, through the ground of Scotland and beyond, the same golden light from the mirror's vision moving through and through and through. The door at the crossroads, the hands coming through. This, he understood now. This is what that meant. Not one grand moment. Every time something that has been fixed is allowed to move again. Every time magic is freed from the shape someone forced it into because they were afraid of what it was. That's the door, that's what I hold open, not with effort, with presence. He opened his eyes. Voldemort was on his knees. Not Harry's doing, Voldemort was on his knees because the stone was gone and the stone had been the plan and the plan had ended. And Quirrell's body, without the stone's magic feeding the hope that had sustained Voldemort's possession of it, was struggling. Harry could see it. The seams of the possession showing, the body working to sustain something too large for it. He walked to Quirrell and crouched in front of him, not to threaten. He looked at Quirrell's face, the real Quirrell face, the mild academic eyes that were very frightened and very present when they weren't being used as instruments, and he felt Hecate's earlier instruction, be present, be honest, be yourself entirely. And then he thought of something she hadn't said but that he understood from everything she was. Compassion isn't the same as mercy. Mercy is what you give the powerful. Compassion is what you give the suffering. Queerness, Harry said. Quirrell's eyes focused on him, the real eyes. Potter, this is going to end now, Harry said gently, not as a threat, as information. Whatever is riding you, it can't stay, not here, not tonight. I want you to know that what happens is not your fault. You were looking for something real when he found you. You wanted to understand the world. That's not a small thing to want. Quirrell stared at him. His face was working through several things at once. Also, Harry said, I'm going to touch your arm briefly. Don't, the voice from behind his eyes started. Harry touched Quirrell's arm. He didn't do anything complicated. He didn't fight Voldemort. Fighting would have required treating this as a contest, and it wasn't a contest. It was a negotiation with physics. He simply made himself present, the full first tongue attending, the wholeness of what he was in contact with Quirrell's skin. Magic, it turned out, did not coexist well with its own negation. What Voldemort was, what he had made himself through decades of deliberate self-unmanning, the Horcruxes and the rituals and the endless seeking of the opposite of everything magic actually was not so much evil as anti in the physical sense. Anti-magic, or as close to it as a person could achieve while still using magic as an instrument. A dark star consuming rather than radiating, and when something consuming touched something that was entirely, fundamentally not, Harry being, in the most basic sense, motion and light, and the river in full spring flood, the contact lasted 3 seconds. It felt longer. Voldemort's shade, the wisp of spirit that had been sustaining itself through Quirrell's skull and unicorn blood and desperate hope, came loose the way the stone had come loose, not with a fight, but with the inevitable quality of things that have been wrong for a very long time finally being allowed to become something else. Harry felt it go like the stone had gone, outward dispersing, not destroyed because he didn't believe in destroying things if returning them was possible, but dispersed into the world in the way of things that have been held too long in shapes that didn't fit them. Not dead, not quite, diminished. A seed of something that still existed somewhere because you couldn't unmake a person entirely, not even a person who had worked very hard to unmake themselves, but removed, no longer here. No longer a weight on this body, on this building, on this particular November night. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him, held him upright while the absence of the thing that had been riding him settled through his body like a slow tide change, the color coming back to his face, the breath going from strangled to merely shallow, the real eyes moving behind their lids with the irregular quality of someone who is deeply unconscious but actually finally resting. Harry set him carefully on the floor. He checked his pulse, which was weak but present, and looked at Quirrell's face in the torchlight, the mild, lost, frightened face of a man who had been looking for extraordinary things and found them in the worst possible way, and felt the specific, uncomplicated compassion of someone who understands the difference between a person who chose evil and a person who was consumed by it. He stood up. He looked at the empty mirror. His reflection looked back, not the older version, not the crossroads. Just himself, 11 years old in school robes with his mother's eyes, standing in a chamber under Hogwarts with his hands open and everything changed. He looked at himself for a long time. He felt the stone's dispersion still moving through the castle's stones, through the ground, through the world, less intense now but still present, like the last light after the sun has gone. Flamel somewhere would be feeling this. Perenelle Flamel. Harry thought about them with something that was not regret but was adjacent to it, the weight of an action taken with full understanding of its cost to specific people. He hoped they had been happy. He hoped 665 years had given Flamel enough time to understand what the stone was, and what it wasn't, and that its going back was not a defeat but a completion. He hoped they had been very happy. He went back through the chambers. The protections were simpler going back because the castle led him through them the way it led him through everything, attentively making room. The chess pieces stood aside. The keys parted. The devil's snares remained stirred as he passed, not with life, it was still dead, but with something like the movement of things that have been moved by a strong wind. He came up through the trapdoor and Fluffy opened one eye and closed it again, and the harp was still playing, and the corridor beyond was full of lamplight and the smell of stone and age, and the particular quality of a very old castle on a very significant night. Ron and Hermione were at the corridor's entrance. Not inside, they'd done as he'd asked, had gone back through the flames, presumably argued about whether to go for Dumbledore, and compromised by coming to wait at the door where they could be useful immediately if required. This was, Harry thought, deeply characteristic of both of them. Hermione's face when she saw him was the face of someone who has been holding a great deal very tightly and has just been allowed to let it go. Ron covered his relief with movement, stepping forward, grabbing Harry's arm, checking for injury with the brisk thoroughness of someone who has been worrying for an hour and is processing that worry through action. Are you all right?" Hermione asked. "Yes," Harry said, and then because the hallway was lamplight and his friends were here and the stone was gone and the castle was warm around them, he said it again with everything he meant by it. "Yes, I really am." Ron looked at him for a moment. "Quirrell, he's in the last chamber, he needs the hospital wing." Harry paused. "He'll be all right, he's going to need a while, but he'll be all right." "And Voldemort?" Hermione asked very quietly. Harry thought about how to answer this. "Gone," he said finally. "Not dead. I don't think he can be made fully dead yet. There are other things I don't have a complete picture of yet." But he's gone from here. He's not a danger tonight or for a while. He paused. He'll come back eventually, but when he does, it won't be like this, and we'll know more. Hermione nodded slowly, processing, filing. Ron was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "The stone." "Gone," Harry said, returned, a long beat. "Good," Ron said, simple and final in the way he said things when he'd thought about them from every angle and reached a conclusion. "That's good." Harry looked at his two friends in the lamplight of the third-floor corridor, with the castle moving warmly around them and the night thick and cold against the windows, and felt the peace from the mirror's vision, that specific, complete, non-triumphant peace, settle through him like the last chord of a very long piece of music finding its resolution. Not arrived, still in motion, still the river, but on the right path, going in the right direction with the right people beside him. That was enough. That was more than enough. Dumbledore came to the hospital wing at midnight. Harry was already there, sitting in the chair beside Quirrell's bed when the door opened and the blue robes and half-moon glasses appeared in the lamplight. Dumbledore stopped. He looked at Harry. He looked at Quirrell, who was sleeping with the profound, dreamless quality of someone deeply exhausted by a very long occupation. He came and sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. For a while neither of them said anything. "The stone," Dumbledore said finally. "Gone," Harry said. "Returned more accurately." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Nicholas Flamel," he said. "I thought about him a great deal," Harry said, "before I decided, and after." He paused. "I think it was right. I think he would understand if he knew everything I know." A pause. "Though I imagine he'll be very sad." Dumbledore looked at the window. Outside, the castle grounds were dark and still, the loch flat and black, the sky thick with clouds that had been building all evening. "I had plans," he said carefully, "for the stone. If it had been recovered by the wrong hands, I intended—" "I know," Harry said. "You had several contingencies. I could see the architecture of them in the conversation we had in November." He looked at his hands. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you what I was planning. I thought about it. I decided that telling you would have resulted in a conversation where you tried to redirect the outcome, and I couldn't allow that." He paused. "Not because I don't respect you, because I understood what needed to happen with the stone and I couldn't compromise it." Dumbledore looked at him. Really looked in the way he hadn't quite allowed himself to do before, not the assessing chess player look, not the warm headmaster look, not the carefully maintained expression of a man managing his response to something he hadn't expected. Just looking at Harry, at what Harry was. "You are Hecate's child," he said, not a question. "Yes," Harry said. "I suspected," Dumbledore said. "Since the sorting, before perhaps since I first reviewed what happened on October 31st, 10 years ago, and found that certain aspects of it refused to be explained by any framework I had available." He paused. "I told myself I was being fanciful." "You weren't," Harry said. A long pause. "I owe you an apology." Harry looked at him. This surprised him, which was unusual. Harry was rarely surprised. "I have been," Dumbledore said carefully, "planning around you. Since before you arrived. I had a story in my head, the boy who lived, the chosen one, the symbol that Voldemort could be defeated. I had a role in that story for you, and I began positioning you toward it before I knew nearly enough about you to justify that." He paused. "You told me in November that you'd prefer to be asked rather than positioned. You were right, and I have not honored that request, and I am sorry." Harry looked at the old man in the lamplight, the long silver beard, the half-moon glasses, the eyes that were blue and deep and genuinely at this moment without their usual management. "Thank you," Harry said. "For saying that. I mean it." "I know," Harry looked at Quirrell. "What happens to him now, he'll be cared for. Whatever was done to him, the possession, the physical costs, will address everything we can." A pause. "He'll likely not teach again, but he should recover." Harry nodded. "Good." He stood. He was tired, not in the way of having overused magic. He didn't tire that way, but in the human way, the weight of a significant day settling into the bones. "I'm going to sleep." Dumbledore looked up at him. In the lamplight, the expression on his face was, Harry filed it, turned it over, identified it after a moment. It was the expression of a man who has spent a very long time being the most important thing in a room and has encountered, without resentment, the experience of that not being true and has found it not diminishing, clarifying. "Harry," Dumbledore said, "there are things coming, not tonight, not soon, but coming. Voldemort is gone from here, but he is not gone, as you yourself said." "The Horcruxes, I know about the Horcruxes," Harry said. He'd found the reference in the restricted section 3 weeks ago, in the third book he hadn't opened, which had eventually opened for him on its own terms and revealed things he'd spent several evenings sitting very still with. "I know what they are and roughly how many, and I have some ideas about the order of operations." He paused. "When you're ready to ask me rather than position me, I'll tell you what I know." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "I look forward to that conversation," he said, and Harry believed him. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on it, something occurring to him. "Professor," he said, "the mirror, the arist. After you move it from the chamber, wherever you put it next, I'd suggest somewhere people won't stumble on it accidentally." He paused. It's not dangerous exactly, but it's very honest, and honesty in large doses without context can be destabilizing. He thought about the men who had wasted away in front of it. Most people aren't ready for their heart's desire to be shown to them without warning. Dumbledore looked at him. "And you," he said, "what did it show you?" Harry thought about the crossroads, the door, the golden light, the peace. "Something true," he said, "something I was already working toward." He opened the door. "Good night, Professor." He walked out into the corridor, and the castle was warm and ancient and full of sleeping students and the particular night magic of a place that has held extraordinary things for a very long time. And he walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his awareness spread wide, and his mother's presence in the background hummed the way it always was. The common room was empty. He'd expected that. It was past midnight, and he'd left Ron and Hermione at the hospital wing door with the firm instruction that they needed to sleep, which Hermione had argued with, and Ron had agreed to immediately and then used to drag Hermione up the stairs by the elbow. He didn't begrudge them. They'd been awake since dinner and they'd held themselves steady through everything, and that steadiness had cost them something, and rest was what it cost, and rest was what they should have. He sat in front of the fire alone. The common room was red and gold and quiet, the fire burning low, the windows showing the deep black of a Scottish night with clouds over the stars. He sat and let the day settle through him, the stone, the chamber, Quirrell, Dumbledore, all of it finding its place, the way water finds its level, the way magic returns to what it came from. He felt the stone's dispersal still moving, far out now, far beyond the castle. He felt it in the quality of the world's magic, the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, not dramatic, just present, a note added to the chord. Flamel's great work returned to the river going on. He reached for his mother's presence in the background hum. She was there. More present than usual, not urgent, not alarmed, the specific warmth of someone who has been watching a difficult thing and seen it come right. He felt her the way he felt the castle's attention, attentively, without demand, with the particular quality of something very large and very patient that has been waiting for a specific moment and is now simply present in it. "You let it go," she said, in the way she communicated without words. "Yes," he said, "it was the right choice, I know," a pause that felt like the space between stars, vast and quiet and full of something that wasn't nothing. "I won't always be able to come," she said. "When you need me, I'll be here, but you don't need me the way you did at the beginning." He understood this. He'd been understanding it gradually since October, the way children understand their parents have whole lives beyond them, not with pain exactly, but with a growing complexity that wasn't painful. He had her. He would always have her. He also had himself entirely and increasingly, and those two things were not in competition. "I know," he said. "Thank you for watching." "Always," she said. And then the door at the crossroads. "You understand it now." Yes, he looked at the fire. "It's not a single moment. It's every moment when something that should be moving is allowed to move. Every time the magic is freed from a shape it was forced into. Every time a person is," he paused, finding the word, "seen clearly. Without the shape someone else put on them." Her presence was warm and deep and old as night. "Yes," she said, "exactly that. I'll be opening it a lot then," he said. Something that was her equivalent of laughter moved through the background hum, warm and vast and genuinely delighted. "Yes," she said, "you will." She receded, not gone, never gone, just back to the place she lived when she wasn't called, the background presence of something that had made you and continued to be interested in what you did with yourself. Harry sat with the receding of her the way he sat with everything, with full attention, without grasping, letting it be what it was. The fire burned. Outside, the clouds had broken. The stars were out over Scotland, cold and brilliant, and the loch reflected them imperfectly the way water always does, not the stars themselves, but the idea of stars, the impression of light in a surface made of motion. He could see them from the common room window. He looked at them for a while, then he looked at his hands, 11 years old. 1 year of Hogwarts done, mostly done, with the Christmas holidays remaining and the rest of the school year after that. And 5 more years beyond that, and a life beyond those, shaped in ways he couldn't see clearly yet, but that he was moving toward with the steady, unhurried confidence of a river that knows where it's going. He thought about Ron, who had played the chess game with such complete unself-conscious mastery, who would spend the next day being entirely modest about it, and who deserved the complete opposite of modesty. He thought about Hermione, who had stayed up every night with her books looking for frameworks to describe what he was, and who had found them and filed them and hadn't once, not once, let the strangeness of it change how she treated him. Who had hugged him in the corridor before the black flames with the fierceness of someone who understands what a thing costs and gives the hug anyway. He thought about Neville, whose confidence had been so carefully ground down over years that he'd internalized everyone else's limits as his own, and who had in the last 3 months started pushing back against them in small quiet ways that were the beginning of something Harry intended to actively encourage. He thought about what the year had given him, and what the year had cost, and weighed them honestly and found the balance satisfying. The fire burned down to coals. Harry watched them glow, deep orange fading to red, the heat in them still significant even as the flame was gone. He thought about the stone's magic dispersing outward through the world and wondered where it was going, what it was doing, whether somewhere in Oxford or Paris or Alexandria someone with the right kind of sensitivity had felt something shift tonight and didn't know why. Whether some magic that had been diminished somewhere was a little less diminished now. Whether the river was running a little fuller. He hoped so. He thought probably yes. He got up. He stretched, feeling the tiredness properly now, the comfortable weight of a body that had been through something significant and wanted to sleep. He went to the foot of the stairs. He stopped. He looked back at the room. At the fire's coals, at the red and gold hangings, at the notice board and the squashy armchairs and the round windows with their view of the grounds and the sky. At the space that was improbably and completely his. He thought of Vernon Dursley and the cupboard under the stairs and the hand-me-down clothes and 10 years of strategic invisibility. He thought of Hecate at the crossroads, watching from the shadows every single day. I was always there. He thought of Ollivander's face when the shop had lit up, every wand box glowing all at once, and Ollivander saying, "I see now why I made it." He thought of the matchstick, the lake, the hat afraid, the troll returning to what it came from, the stone dissolving in his hand like a heart taking its last deliberate beat. He thought, this is the first year. This was the beginning, and he felt completely and without qualification ready for whatever came next. He went upstairs. He got into bed. He closed his eyes. Outside, the stars were very bright and the grounds were very quiet, and deep in the loch something vast and ancient and non-threatening rolled over in its sleep in the way it had been doing all year, patient and unhurried, keeping its own time, dreaming whatever ancient things dream in the dark. The castle exhaled around its sleeping students. Harry slept, and if he dreamed, the dreams were simple and good, and in the morning the sun came up over Scotland cold and brilliant and specific, the way truth comes up when you've been honest, arriving without apology, filling every corner, making every previous darkness seem less like a permanent condition and more like what it always was. A moment before light.